So there's some things that people takes them a while to catch, although Rick's pretty clear about it, that there are a set of English words that he uses that map right back to either Hegel's German words or common Greek usage in Aristotle or Heraclitus. And once you sort of perform all that on-the-fly translation, it is easier to follow, Kenneth. I think this is somewhat his reinventing of language to carry philosophical topics. Although, philosophy is not easily put into some sort of, in fact, not easily, can't be at all put into some sort of set of orthodoxy that all one has to do is memorize the catechism and then you've got Christianity, or philosophy or whatever down pat, it. I mean, there are examples, although Kenneth doesn't use them, there are examples in Plato and the more Socratic dialogues where people who think they're really smartasses come in, and when Socrates asks a question, they actually give the answer to that question that Socrates gave in a prior discussion. It's in a prior dialogue, and Socrates just rips them a new one just to show that they haven't understood anything. That the same verbalism misunderstood with the inability to understand it and then properly defend it is useless. And Kenneth is certainly that way. While he uses language very precisely, I don't think he thinks for a moment that you can sort of memorize philosophy, and become a philosopher. That it's a constant thinking through from multiple perspectives issues in light of what we currently know about them.
Sounds a bit tiring.
It's a bit tiring. Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Yeah, he said he said it was hard work. He did say something that philosophy, as much as it begins in understanding human nature, all life begins in this gnostic immediacy of the world and everything, that by the time you get to a level of understanding that could be called eristic, you realize that most of your human nature is just leading you astray and turning you away from excellence and from even considering what might be excellent in a human being. It's turned you to pleasure, appetite, mostly, or utility,
Ideologies.
Things that you constantly, so the philosopher must constantly guard, not just against others, but most of all against himself.
You've said one of the civilizational magic words.
I have. What is that?
The one beginning with A. Well, appetite. We've gone from, say, the Middle Ages, where the objective culture said to control your appetites, to a culture now where we worship our appetites.
Mammon is our God. Whatever we want, that must be good for us, right? Because we want.
So, and if we try and have this conversation next week, Stephen, I won't even be able to repeat the same things I said today.
Because it was alive in the moment.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I'm just pointing out the cultural change. You go
Well,
back to
yeah, there's
the
You're right.
Middle Ages, you have the aristocrats,
Hmm.
or you have the timocrats, like the samurai, or the timocrats, the rule of the warriors, and their thing is all about excellence, controlling your appetites, rising to the best. You have qualities like honor, loyalty, blah blah blah.
Self-discipline.
And then the merchants appear, the less noble people, and society starts to be orientated towards the supply of goods,
well,
which which does actually trip down to the common people, and you get democracy, and it's all about appetites, building the greatest appetites. The president gets up and talks about, you know, everybody getting their appetites filled has been the greatest thing that you can possibly do.
Chicken in every pot.
yeah.
All of
Not,
it.
Well,
not, not, not.
it all started when the Athens said that Cleon could temporarily be a general, even though he was a tanner by trade, and went off and won the battle up at Corcyra or whatever. And then from then on, history has gone downhill rapidly.
So are we talking about physical appetites or figurative appetites?
Both.
The way physical appetite
Okay.
overtakes one's judgment and decision making and governs one's behavior.
Well,
Go ahead, Stephen.
yeah, well, I'm pointing out, say in the Middle Ages, they aspired to something higher. The church aspired, be a good person, so get in good with God and go to heaven, or the nobles aspired to excellence in their arts. Whereas we're in a culture where, everybody can buy stuff at the shops is the highest good. Does that make sense, Sharon? With how times have
No,
changed?
well, here's the way I am trying to interpret it. Your physical appetite is what you eat. And it probably says yes, because in America now we have an obesity epidemic, right? But it's
Going to the store and buying clothes is another appetite.
That's your figurative appetite.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yes, which means that the more I have is the more I want.
Yes.
The more I need and the more stuff I want. And so I think the appetite we're talking about here is the figurative appetite, and that's the one that requires restraint and discipline. Yes, and I say that with tongue in cheek because the physical appetite, which produces obesity, is a whole psychological disease because there's no restraint and discipline. So there's a commonality there. But in the philosophical sense, can we separate that?
Right. And where you see the difference is when you're starving to death, your physical appetite is actually quite a good judge of what you need right now. You actually do need food. When you're in the desert and you're thirsty, your physical appetite is an excellent judge of what you should be doing right. Find some damn water, right? And so what happens is you build up faith in your appetite of function. And the problem emerges once you've sated all of your actual needs, because then you're like, well, what should I do next? I know, I'll ask my appetite of function what I should do next. But now your appetite of function is not based on things you desperately need. It's like casting about for, I don't know, I need a bigger car. How come that guy's shirt is purple and mine is yellow? I want a purple shirt. I mean, the line between the two comes when you make your appetite your master. If your appetite's a servant, it could be a spectacular servant. I mean, gives really good advice when you're in the wilderness and it's raining and you're cold and your body's saying, maybe you should get under shelter and get dry. It's right. It's telling you the truth. That is in fact what you should do. But that's because where it's functioning correctly is because it's appropriate to your actual circumstances. And you want your real self to be judging whether or not it's appropriate to your real circumstances. But when you've experienced deprivation, it's a temptation later when you don't have deprivation to still let the appetite of function tell you what to do next. And then you're like, I guess I should watch a marathon all weekend of old Star Trek episodes. That's what I want. It's like, maybe that's what you should do next. Maybe that's not what you should do next. Your appetite of function is, you know, a less reliable guide when it's not about genuine need.
In modernity, though, I think the culture stimulates, or the culture cultivates a functional appetite for the want of things.
Yes.
I mean, like Stephen was saying, you know, in the Middle Ages, it was all about, you know, God and the Bible. Now it's who has the biggest house, who's the first trillionaire, who's the first billionaire. All those things create appetites in people that don't have.
Right.
Because that's the standard. So that's the role the culture plays compared to the role the culture played in the Middle Ages.
Sharon, did you read David Roll's little blurb about today's session?
No, not yet.
Oh, well, we'll try, because culture is an artifact. It's what he gets this is from, you know, it's something we create. We create something that then rules over us if we are, I wouldn't say weak-minded or whatever, you know. We let our creatures dominate us. And we must fight that, or we get dominated not necessarily by culture, but by what is created by people that want to rule, that are trying to rule, that want to dominate, that see us that way.
Yes, I think that's what the point I was trying to make. How the culture enhances these appetites.
Yes. This is what Kenneth's introductory paragraph here. He's actually quoted from, David is quoted from Kenneth Smith. He's quoting the paragraph we're actually doing today from the intro. This is paragraph 14 about culture and self-cultivation. So, as usual, Sharon, whether you meant to or not, you're taking us to the text. Courtesy of Donald trying to answer your question. Here we are, right back at the text. Thank you for that function. Why don't we actually do this? Let's do this thing. So this is for those you know, following along on the live stream or watching the YouTube video. This is week 7 or 8, depending on how you count it, of our Millennia and Microcosm interlude about human natures. And this interlude is an answer to Ari's question about a comment I made 8 weeks ago or so about Kenneth's interpretation of modernity, the epoch of modernity, as committing characterological genocide against the character type of the Aristos. And he said, "What did you mean by that? What does Kenneth mean? What is this? You know, what is this all about?" And David and I both scrambled to come up with a response. And David found wonderful fragments of Kenneth Smith text from all kinds of writings he did, which we're folding in as we go. And I found Kenneth's paper, Human Nature's Greek Philosophical Anthropology. So we're going back and forth between the text of that paper and these snippets or fragments that David has collected to answer Ari's question. And part of the reason that we're doing this now in length the way that we are is from the idea that perhaps this paper actually belongs in Millennia and Microcosm, because chapter 4, which covers the ancient world, too briefly touches on these issues of character and the character types, considering how much Kenneth is going to rely on these concepts in the rest of the book that he's written. Maybe there should be a whole chapter about it, because it's an ancient idea. Kenneth says that he got it partly from reading Hegel, partly from reading Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and others, but partly, especially, he got it from reading Hannah Arendt's book, The Human Condition. And reading The Human Condition, where she lays out, according to the Greeks, what are the 3 sectors of the economy and what kinds of behaviors and value systems and thinking are appropriate to each of those sectors of the economy. And she's using that to help explain why she wrote what she did in The Origins of Totalitarianism, but it stands alone very well. Most people don't even realize it's connected to the earlier book. And Kenneth read it, and in light of what he'd seen from Hegel and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, he thought she's more clearly than perhaps anybody before her, she's laying out a framework for understanding human nature, but she's not going far enough. And so he took it further. And by reintroducing all the other stuff. So that's kind of where we are. And it fits in with the ancient worldview. It's part of the ancient worldview. And it goes to the heart of the ancient concept that we're not equal. And the ancients thought that was good. Why the hell would you want to be equal? What, are we all going to be Mozart now? Right? I mean, where are you going to get your great chefs from? Where are you going to get your great architects from? People need to be different. They need to explore their gifts and go in different directions. And as we pursue these differences, the Greeks, have this idea that there are three strange attractors or gravity wells that the diversity of human beings collect around. And that's what this paper is about. But we're still in the intro, so let's talk through the intro. I am pasting in again for those who don't have it handy. There's the outline of the Human Natures paper. We've done the abstract, we've done the prefatory caution, and we've done half of the intro. And today we will start into the second half of the intro, which I overly optimistically last week thought we were going to get through the remaining paragraphs of the intro. Now I don't even think we're going to do it this week because the last several paragraphs are really juicy, which is why when Sharon made her comment, Donald immediately thought of what David had posted, which is the paragraph we're starting into today. It's chewy. All right, so let's dive in. I posted the paragraph in question, and I'm going to actually post the paper again, so everybody should be able to lay their hands on the PDF. Here it is: Human Natures, Greek Philosophical Anthropology, and I will post there. There it's uploading. Boom! There's the PDF, and I just got to remember to send it to everybody new who joins. So we're in the intro, and we're in the paragraph that begins, "What can all this mean as a manifestation of the inner shape of personality and human essence in our time?" Well, Stephen, there's the essence word. Let's actually talk a little bit about this opening. We sort of begin with this idea, gnothiseauton. And for the Greeks, it was a go-to point. It was why you couldn't even enter into the presence of the oracle at Delphi until after you read the little sayings, the aphorisms that were on the carved stone out in front of the temple of Apollo and Dionysus. And gnothiseauton was at the head. It was the one considered, most important of all. And it means know thyself. And part of what they're talking about with know thyself is this idea that we are creatures of two natures, the nature around us and the nature within us. And the nature around us is visible, but the nature within us is not. And of the two, they relate to each other in a dialectic to determine our outcomes in life. If all we do is look outside of ourselves and say, oh, this person was mean to me, oh, that person did a bad thing, oh, this person gave me a gift and an opportunity, then we only understand half of what's going on, or a third of what's going on. The contingency, the external world of things that happen, what Thucydides called touche, or fortune, is a major contributor to whether things end up poor or well for us. But the Greeks understood that the inner nature is equally a contributor. It's equally a contributor because, like the nature around us, according to Heraclitus, the nature within us is infinite. The soul is profound. Nobody can know the full depths of anybody else's soul. Nobody can even know the depths of their own soul. And the soul is imprinted with your character, your human nature, the thing that makes you who you are, that makes you notice the things you notice, that makes you care about the things you care about, want the things that you want, believe the things that you believe. All that's driven by character. If you had a different character, you would be persuaded by different arguments. You would be interested in different parts of the world around you. This unconscious part of ourselves draws us out into the world, but not into all of the world, only into the aspects of the world that we're prepared to care about and notice. And this is central to this whole paper, this concept. Aristotle talks about this a great deal. The Greeks had talked about this before in writing, but Aristotle talks clearly about this idea that to know who or what someone or something is, You can't be distracted by issues like what color is their skin or how taller they are. Are they male or female? These are distractions because people have an enormous range of possible variation in their behavior and in their ideas. And that range, contrary to all the zero-sum childish ideas that the modern world has about all men are like this and all women are like that, all white people are like this, all black people are like that. This is the Greeks didn't fall for that trivial stuff very often because they were raised from birth on the idea that it is the inner character. What Martin Luther King Jr. says in his great "I Have a Dream" speech is a classical Greek idea that you must judge people not by the color of their skin or by any other stupid external character, issue of characterization, but you must judge them by the content of their character because that's the only thing that will tell you what they're going to do, what they're going to care about, what they're going to notice. And those similarities and differences make a bigger impact on whether someone is going to be good or bad than any stupid thing like what's his weight, what color his eyes. I mean, those things don't tell you anything. The prettiest person in the world could murder you in the next moment. I mean, you don't know. But if you know what their character is, then you have some sense of what to expect from them. This is something that, as Donald points out, Plato plays with a lot in his dialogues. He plays a lot with his audience knowing who these characters are who are appearing in these dialogues so that they learn to be cautious or amused when these characters make certain claims, especially when it's out of character for that person to say that. And then it makes you think, oh, is he lying? Is he self-rationalizing? What's going on here? Is he trying to persuade somebody? Why would he say the thing that's so obviously out of character for him? That's a game that he's able to play in a culture where people understand that your character is the essential. And now we're getting to Stephen's concern. That's the essential part of you. In the modern world, the word essential doesn't mean character. It means important. But it doesn't say why you picked this as being important. So people throw the word essential around all the time for things that are not, in fact, essential. They have nothing to do with somebody's character. The essential point in my presentation is the following. The essential meal for tonight is Chinese because, man, do I have a hankering. The essential, we use the word essential to mean almost anything that we want. And that goes back to Sharon's point about appetite and Stephen's about appetite driving the modern world. But it used to mean the opposite of that. All this fluttery, flowing, unreliable stuff about, what's important to me as opposed to what's important to you, or even more for those of us who have affective disorders like bipolar, what's important to me today as opposed to what was important to me last week, versus, if I'm rapid cycling, what will be important to me in an hour. There could be completely different things. Kenneth often talks about existential philosophers throughout the ages have noted that you cannot build a civilization entirely based on the emotional flux of human beings. Because not only can't they agree amongst each other, they can't even agree within themselves from one moment, from one day to the next, what matters. So how do you decide what's essential? And Plato and Aristotle and other people from this tradition, they say that, well, you have to look past the surface. You have to look at the inner character, the more stable part of a person. It's not that it doesn't change, and we're going to come to that today and next week. The inner part of character can change. Your fate can change if your character changes and grows, which it will, because it's an organism under the Greek model. But it changes more slowly than our moods change. It becomes and it can't lie. It can be wrong, but it can't deceive. Even a person with a deceptive character is being true to their character. It's a way to see past, the illusions and deceptions and so forth. So this is why for Aristotle and others, the way to use in an existentialist philosophical tradition, the word essential means of the character, pertaining to the character. And that's the only way that existentialist philosophers in general will try to use this term. And when we throw the term around in other ways, the essential part of my breakfast is this orange because I really like oranges, then we're abusing vocabulary that says things we have no other way to say, says things that we desperately need to be able to say clearly. And that it's if we contaminate those words, which we do, then it leaves us in a state of confusion about the most important parts of life. Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I have a question. So the Greeks saw character probably mostly developed, well developed by the Aristoi. Am I getting that correct? They had the highest development of character, the Aristoi. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
But when Christianity comes along and the concept that everyone is equal inside the church, how does the society address this change? Because in the church, the slaves are equal to the Aristoi because you're all in God's image, and he set out parameters for the character, the Christian character.
Yeah.
So this is quite a change, I think.
It is. There's a great leveling that happens, right? Of the social, political, economic relationships among people in the late ancient world, when Christianity starts to say, none of your differences that you guys think are so important, none of those differences matter, because Jesus's character is better than any heuristic character. You people who call yourselves Aristoi are still behaving in awful ways. I mean, look at Caligula, right? He's supposed to be the creme de la creme. And you know what the early Christian argument is, what good is it to be an Aristos if you still do terrible things and you're an idiot and possibly insane? What is the point of being an Aristos as opposed to being a doulos? And in doing that, in part, what the Christians are doing is the early Christians are accepting Roman propaganda. Because in a society in which to be an Aristos is to be seen as better than other people, every idiot wants to call himself an Aristos. Just naturally, right? I mean, look at the social rewards that come from calling yourself an Aristos. Why wouldn't they lie about it? Of course they would lie about it. And if they can get armies on their side and take the throne and become the emperor, who's going to gainsay them? They'll just stick a sword in you if you disagree with them. So everyone says, okay, yes, Caligula, you are the Aristos among Aristoi. And you know, critics of that arrangement have two choices. They can either hew to the ancient classical worldview and say, no, I don't believe you, Caligula. You are not an Aristos. No matter how much power you have, no matter how many weapons you have, no matter how much wealth you have, you will never be an Aristos. You don't behave like one. You're just not. And then, of course, you get a sword stuck in you. Or you can say, I accept that you are an Aristos. I just don't think that's such a big deal. And my proof that it's not such a big deal is, I mean, look at your behavior. So, you know, Jesus behaved better than you did, and he didn't rule anybody. So, you know, what the early Christians are doing is saying this douloi, banausoi, aristoi thing, it's not as important as have you got Jesus or do you not have Jesus? The character of Jesus, the spirit of Jesus, if you follow that, say the early Christians, it will result in you having a better character than if you follow your own flawed human character. And this becomes the basis for the leveling.
Yes.
Right? And of course, what happens is once you level, you're then able to construct something new upon that flat plane. And the new thing that they construct is say, okay, Jesus is above everybody else. We're all trying to be like Jesus, but Jesus is Jesus. He doesn't have to try to be himself. He has that good character. So that's superior. Early on, they're like, he's like a God, and eventually he is a God, or he's part of God, or an aspect of God. So they move him out of the mortal realm. And once they've done that, they can then fill in the space in between. They can say, well, you know, Paul is not Jesus, but Paul follows Jesus and believes in Jesus, and he's trying to teach other people how to be more like Jesus. So in a way, even though Paul is at the same level we are, in truth, I don't expect anybody to call my ignorant butt in to teach them about Jesus. I want to learn about Jesus, and I want to learn about Jesus from someone who knows about Jesus. So Paul starts to get this teacher-student relationship that he may not have even wanted, but he starts to get this teacher-student relationship to the people who are just learning about Christianity or who haven't put in the time and energy that he has. And the same is true for all the others. And so gradually a church hierarchy begins to bubble up out of that flat plane to fill in the space in between God and the people who are supposedly all equal, except that now some of them aren't. And once the fall of Rome happens and you get the barbarian invasions and paganism and heathenism fighting back against Christianity, and now Christianity needs an army, out of the interests of pragmatism, these lovers of peace who are now seen as above the rest of their flock, the shepherds, if you will, they need somebody who can fight back against the Vikings and the others. So they start to promote a second tier, those who fight. And so you end up with the three castes of the medieval world, those who pray, those who fight, and those who labor. And thus the brotherhood of man ends up turning into a hierarchy.
Oh, so that's the consequence of the leveling.
Yeah.
The three castes.
You can't create a new class system easily if you have a very strong existing class system. But once you've leveled everything, now it's like having a tabula rasa. You can begin anew. And Jason notes the levelers. Yes, 17th century England, there were peasant movements that fought back against the corruption of the Middle Ages by trying to appeal back to the origins of Christianity. And one of those groups actually called themselves the levelers. They said, we have gone wrong in creating a new hierarchy. We need to flatten it again and go back to the brotherhood of man. And we know about them because a lot of people like Froissart, the historian, and others would quote these guys. And of course, they would frequently give these speeches where these people are saying, we're all equal in the eyes of the Lord, and we should all treat one another like brothers and sisters. And, we don't need any of these hierarchies, and there shouldn't be concentrations of wealth. And then the historian would say, and other evil talk like that. And the modern reader goes, there's something wrong with you, Mr. Historian. You're listening to this stuff and you think this is the evil talk. It's studying the history of the levelers and John Ball and the other kind of anti hierarchical movements it makes for interesting reading. And I thank you, Jason, for bringing that up. Every time I said the word leveling when I was talking to Sharon, I was thinking about the levelers, and you spotted me. I'm busted. So. Yeah, it's what you see in the late Middle Ages is there's a lot of different movements that are all striving to go back to the early Christian idea that we need to flatten these obscene hierarchies. From their perspective, things were better when it was a brotherhood of man than when we had those who pray and those who fight and those who live. So okay, so that's character, right? And that's this thing about essential and essentialist. And Heraclitus reminds us repeatedly that we're caught between two authoritative infinities, the nature around us and the nature within us. And he stresses the authoritative quality that nature has, as does Aristotle later on when he constantly says kata phusin, according to nature. He's like, your logic is all well and good, but talk to the hand. Because when nature talks, nature wins the argument. Nature doesn't have to prove a damn thing to you. You can make all the rational arguments that you can fly that you want, but when you jump off the roof as a teenager, you're still going to break your leg. No matter how strong you thought you were, no matter how big you thought you could jump, no matter how much you thought you were Superman, your leg's still broken. Too bad. According to nature wins the arguments. As Kafka says in the contest between yourself and the world, back the world. Right? Kafka's saying an Aristotelian thing when he says that. And this concept, you can find it in Heraclitus. Heraclitus talks about people act as though they had a private intelligence of their own. But there's millions of people, and all their private intelligences disagree with each other. That's what he means by private. You have an intelligence, but it only makes sense to you. The person next to you has a different intelligence, has different ideas about things. The two of you can't get your heads together. And Heraclitus basically says, you're never going to build a civilization by fighting about which one of us is right. None of us is right.
Are you talking about Franz Kafka, the playwright who wrote the Metamorphoses?
He's the one who wrote the bit about backing the world. Yeah. Yeah. Kenneth loves Kafka.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, you'll find lots of sometimes he explicitly cites Kafka. Sometimes you have to read between the lines, but Kafka's always sitting there behind him, muttering in Kenneth's ear. So so Kenneth says, and he's got fragments that, and people might miss the significance of these fragments unless you spend a lot of time poring over them and comparing them to each other. But if you do that, you will notice that what Heraclitus is saying is that the reason we should study nature closely and deeply, look below the surfaces of things, look for the principles of things. The reason we need to do that is that despite the fact that we all have a private intelligence that's sometimes right and sometimes wrong, nature is shared by all of us. We share the world. When we walk out into the world, there it is. It's the same world. Whether we see it the same way or not, it's the same world. And it has an intelligence of its own that is obvious when you think about the coordination. How the hell does an acorn become an oak? How does that happen? You know, why, you know, without anybody sitting there over it with tools forcing it to happen, the acorn is smart enough to generate an oak from itself. And Heraclitus is like, this is astonishing. All these things around here, they don't all manage it, but they're all trying. They all know somehow what to do. And it's amazing that that works and that it's worked for so long. The Greeks were very keen about the ugly truth that part of what makes us mortal is that the things we try to create have a tendency to fall down a lot. You know, we're proud if we make a building that stands for 40 years or 60 years, but then it falls down. You know, when we find ruins where almost all of it is toppled, but they're still part of a wall, we're like, woo, look how long it's lasted. That's amazing. And of course, when we say that, we're just sort of ignoring the fact that, well, most of it, in fact, did not last that long. Most of it's lying in rubble around that one wall and three columns. And the Greeks were like, this is a problem. When people make things, they make temporary things, fragile things, things that fall apart a lot. But nature is able to make things that persist for, even though it's always changing, it somehow makes things that at the same time persist for millennia, for amounts of time we can't even estimate. There's a naturalist who wrote a bunch of books in the Pacific Northwest. And he was talking about these foothills of the Cascade Mountains. You know, I live by the Cascade Mountain. Mount Rainier is part of the Cascade Mountains. And the foothills are much shorter than the Cascade Mountains. And everyone thinks of them as foothills. But there's this group of foothills outside of Issaquah, which is close to Seattle. And they include places like Tiger Mountain and Squawk Mountain. And he always would call them the Issaquah Alps. And people thought that was weird. Alps? Aren't the Alps supposed to be tall? These are just foothills. Why would you call them the Issaquah Alps? He says, because these foothills were there before the Cascade Mountains. That was the mountain range that was there before the Cascades. We look at Mount Rainier and think, oh my God, it's timeless and huge and it must be the oldest thing ever. And it's like, no, the stupid little foothill at its feet is far older than Mount Rainier. He says, not only that, there are stupid little streams and trickles that run down Tiger Mountain. And they're, you know, you could fill your cup, but it wouldn't be quick. You know, it's a little trickle of water that are older than Mount Rainier. It's like a trickle of water. It's fragile, it's flowing, it's changing, and yet it has endured longer than a vast mountain. It's astonishing, right? Nature has this power. And Heraclitus says, okay, I hear people brag about their intelligence all the time, but come on, that's intelligence. And what the coordination of all these things, the weather and the earth and the rain and the animals and the plants that allows these things to persist over such enormous amounts of time, that's success, that's strength, that's intelligence right there. And we should respect that and study it. Go ahead, Ginny.
This is why when I pick up mangoes from the tree, I go to the tree and touch the tree and I say, thank you, tree, for producing all these mangoes.
Yes. Yes.
I've become much more respectful about trees and plants than I used to be.
Because it's amazing.
Provided you have no iguanas hanging around the tree.
Yeah.
Thank you. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, that word flourishing, this is what I get from the humanists all the time, that the greatest good is every person in the world must flourish. But not every acorn can become an oak tree. In fact, it would create chaos if they did. So the order of the world is that only so many make it.
And there's a truth in that, but there's also a falsehood in that. And we have to, what you're saying is has a dialectical truth to it. So on the one hand, that's absolutely true about acorns. And it might be true about people, but it doesn't follow that because it's true about acorns, it's true about people. Because the difference between oaks and people is that oaks produce thousands of children every year. There is just no way. But human beings have a different evolutionary strategy. There are species like the oak, like fishes and insects, that produce god-awful numbers of young. But there are other living beings that produce very, very few young and invest heavily in their survival. And Homo sapiens is one of those. Most people don't even produce a child every year. Most people don't even produce a child every decade of their lives. We are stingy in our child production.
And I would say it's the natural order that humans exploit each other.
Well, what the natural order is for Homo sapiens is tricky to work out. But it's part of the thing about using metaphors and analogies to understand Homo sapiens is we're like acorns and oaks in some ways. I think what geneticists say we're like 98% identical, and we're made up of the same elements. We also have DNA. A lot of the DNA is the same, and yet, nevertheless, we also are quite different in some ways. So
I would say it's only when you have large parts of your population with their noses to the grindstone on a daily basis that you have the benefit that can raise the narrow few to something greater.
It might be. It might be. Thank you, Stephen. Sharon, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
This is something that I've thought about a lot, Stephen. But when you look at the construct of nature, there's the lion, and then there's the ant. And in between, there's everybody else. So not everybody is equal. And I look at that and say, well, that was the original intention. And if you go to the Bible, and Jesus tells about the story about the parable of the talent, where this rich guy gives these three people different talents and what they do with it. And then when it comes time to do the assessment, the guy who takes it and bears it because he's afraid and does nothing without it, he loses. So there is the implication that work and effort equals rewards. So not everybody is equal.
Yes. And nature, we all hear that nature abhors a vacuum, but nature also abhors a monoculture. Mother Nature doesn't make species in which all the members of the species are equal. I've got a bird out here that feeds at my feeder multiple times a day. I think it's a house finch. It's a little hard to tell, but it comes in with the house finches and goes out with them. So I think it's one of the house finches, but it's got a birth defect. Its right eye is bulges from its head. The whole not out of the socket, but like the whole area is swollen. And I thought at first it was just sick, but it's been that way for the last 3 weeks. So I would think on the one hand, oh no, survival of the fittest. I don't know if it's going to make it. Poor little birdie. And yet it's doing fine. Nature produces, not everything in nature is arranged into a simple hierarchy of the worst and the best. Nature likes to produce an enormous variety in each species because that's the driver for evolution, right? There has to be diversity. Sooner or later, the conditions that our species is optimized for are going to change. And frequently those changes happen catastrophically all of a sudden. And when they happen, the center of the bell curve that was strength is suddenly unfit for the new conditions, and they all die out because now they're weak. This happens in nature all the damn time. It's punctuated equilibrium, which was written about in the early 70s, is a big breakthrough in Darwinian evolution that sees that things don't just gradually change over time. There are these catastrophes that shake up species. And when the shakeup happens, It's the strong part of the population that dies, and it's somewhere among the large halo of weirdos and misfits who never did very well under the old order. There's a good chance that somebody will be right for the new conditions. Someone who doesn't like the sun, who likes it dark, might do better if there's a
You're
great
quoting
overall
Karl
sun.
Marx.
No, this is not Marx. Marx was straight Darwinism. No, this shakes up everybody's orthodoxies. It's like you don't know who among the weirdos is going to become the center of the bell curve.
That's why Marx wanted a revolution. He had to throw off the dice in his life. And he came up with a poor roll, and then he wanted to overturn the table so that he'd get a better roll of the dice.
No, he was
Everything
talking about the
about
majority.
Marx,
He was talking
everything
about the
about
majority.
Marx was always, I want the best roll of the dice, blow everybody else.
That's easy to say, but it actually flies in the face of what Marx says. And I'm not defending Marx, but I mean, if you're going to criticize him, you got to criticize him right. He was talking about the proletariat as the majority. And he was saying that he stood on the side of the majority. And he's saying that because that's standard Darwinian evolutionary theory of his time. You know, he and Engels spent a bunch of time reading Darwin. And so it makes sense that he's thinking in Darwinian terms. But that model of evolution is obsolete now. It's true but insufficient. We now understand punctuated equilibrium means that there are times when the conditions on Earth change dramatically. And when they do, a lot of successful species depopulate and have to rebuild from among the survivors, from among the weirdos. This happens over and over in the course of evolution. And it explains something that for 150 years, strict Darwinists were never able to explain, which is why are there gaps in the fossil record? They believed, right? They used to say, we all grew up with this model of evolution. There was a long series of slow, tiny mutations, and that species would gradually change over time from one species into another. That's what we were all taught. You can still find countless books like this and countless movies that will say that's what evolution is. But the problem was the fossil record didn't match. The fossil record showed discontinuities. And it wasn't until the 70s that we figured out that's because there are catastrophes in Earth's history, and they happen more often than we think they do. And when a catastrophe occurs, the environment changes rapidly, all of a sudden, and nobody can evolve that fast. So the majority of the group dies out. But if you're lucky and you've got enough weirdos, somewhere in your weirdos is somebody who's fit for the new conditions.
New theories for old.
Say that again?
New theories for old.
New
Magic lamp, new lamps for old.
Yeah, this doesn't actually disagree with what you're saying about oaks and acorns. This is saying that most of the acorns aren't going to make it. But they can make it in the meantime. It's just when we hit the crisis that we discover that most people were so busy becoming fit for the old conditions that when the new conditions hit, they're not able to adapt.
Well, certainly if we, by flourishing, we mean everybody gets what they want or what they aspire to. Well, in terms of material things, it's even in America, it's not going to work out. Absolutely, is it? It's like that story of the family that had $120,000 car, so they had indebted themselves, aspiring to the highest order of market goods, and then they were on food stamps because they couldn't afford any food, repaying the debt on this, very expensive car because they were trying to keep up with the Joneses. They were aspiring to a level of material goods that were beyond their means. And this is what the whole, I regard it as very wrong myself. I'm a bit of a conservative, but this whole thing where people are encouraged to borrow huge amounts of money to pursue these material goods.
It's not good, is it?
I'm an old style conservative in that sense.
In that sense, so am I. And growing up, I lived next door to someone who lived exactly the life you're saying. They had a car they absolutely could not afford, and they suffered for it. It was not good. Anyway,
Well,
we've sort of wandered from the point a little bit as
the
far as
highest good is driving down the street in the shiniest car and demanding the respect of the people passing by. That's the highest order of existence. Now you understand, Rick.
This is the kind of critique that Kenneth is making in this paper for sure. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Well, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to promote this wandering, but the sort of, you know, Darwin has an evolutionary model, which, as he saw, all the niches are filled. It's very dense. And therefore, for something new to come in is very tough. You're competing against things that are long optimized to fill their niche. But you could kind of see, and it's somewhat the new theory, is what's important is not the incremental change or whatever change got us to all niches filled. It's the great extinctions that free up space. If you want to see evolution in action, put it in an ecosystem that's unfilled, that's got lots of openings. And there's where you see what happens. So the sort of newer view is, in a way, could have been deduced from the older view, but Darwin never saw that. I mean, he observed, and they, they're, you're absolutely right about the change, and I just want to say, but they are kind of connected, the older view and the new view, because the big extinctions create space in which experiments can succeed. That's enough.
Yeah, and Stephen Jay Gould would agree with you. He and his scientific partner who wrote the paper.
Well, that's where I stole this from.
That's where I stole it from.
I was an avid reader of natural history up until he died.
Yes. Anyone who has not read Stephen Jay Gould, you are just costing yourself. The man wrote enormous numbers of books on biology and evolution, and he was a great writer. He liked to write essays that start with two odd but seemingly entirely unrelated facts. And then he would show you how, despite what you think, those two things are not only related, but they depend on each other. If it weren't for the one, the other simply could never have happened. And they're just a pleasure to read. They're very well written. They're not jargony or anything. So when he writes about punctuated equilibrium, he's equally clear, but he also applies it to everything. So the thing, he swore until his dying day that he did not disagree with Darwin, and that, like you said, everything that he and his scientific partner wrote was, perfectly in accord with Darwin. But what I would note, despite his preference, is that that's all well and good, but when we were trying to be strict Darwinists, we really couldn't explain the spots in the fossil record. Those gaps, we kept just saying, well, someday we'll find what's in the middle. And it was punctuated equilibrium that led us to understand, no, we won't find we'll almost never find what's in the middle, because what we're finding is the things that there were a lot of. And what we're not finding is the things there were hardly any of. And the reason is that fossilization almost never happens. It's a numbers game. There has to be a lot of something for there to be enough of them for one of them to blunder into the right conditions that it gets preserved in the fossil record. When there's just a few weirdos, you don't see them. I mean, they live a normal life and they never end up in those weird conditions where they get fossilized. And so they're just going to be missing from the fossil record unless and until the material conditions change on Earth and the main population dies out and now they become the successful one, in which case there then becomes a whole bunch of them. And now there's enough of them that sooner or later one of them will blunder into the right conditions to be fossilized in the fossil record. And thus the gaps are a feature, not a bug. They're telling us what's happening. And it took like 100 years of evolutionary theory, lots of smart people, before anyone could put that together and go, what if there are gaps in the record? What if we're not wrong? What if things are what they appear to be? What if there actually are gaps? And that tells us
There are
something.
gaps. Go look for the meteor crater. Go
Yes.
look for the the volcano, the whatever they call the cauldron.
Yes.
There are remnants of what happened that caused that gap.
That's right.
They're just not fossils.
Exactly. Exactly. One of the biggest changes since I was a little boy. I mean, I've been reading evolutionary stuff since before first grade. It's the science I was crazy for. And dinosaurs, right? All kids love dinosaurs. Well, all kids love dinosaurs now. Back then, they thought I was pretty weird. But I read all that stuff that I could get my hands on. It was my first big science. And let me tell you, the mass extinctions, people just the explanation was sometimes it happens. Maybe this happened. Maybe that happened. Who knows? We could never know. But you look today and you'll find that the big mass extinctions, they're increasingly able to correlate them directly to events like Donald was talking about, like, the asteroid striking at the end of the Mesozoic, but also the Deccan obsidian, sorry, not obsidian, the Deccan basalts fields of India, field after field of this black stone. And they figured out that that was caused by a supervolcano erupting. And the supervolcano is the one that brought an end to one of the ages of life on Earth. And so they're increasingly able to connect these catastrophes to the great extinctions. It's interesting. Anyway, all of this plays in. I took us far afield, for which I apologize, but all of this actually is relevant. So Heraclitus is saying we are stuck between two authoritative infinities. There's the world around us, the nature around us, and there's the nature within us. And each of them is very hard to learn about. You have to study and study and study. It has to be a civilization-wide effort. You need lots of people studying. You need specialists, you need generalists, you need time to try out plausible theories that get disproven. It takes all that just to figure out what's going on. And that's with things you can look directly at with your own eyes and still not understand. But he says, the other infinity is the nature inside you. And it's every bit as lawful and law driven as the infinity around you. And it's every bit as important as the infinity around you because it's with you all the time, which is why Martin Luther King Jr. says you judge people by the content of their character. Whether they have that purple shirt on or whether they cut their hair a certain way or whether they use a certain kind of slang, that comes and goes, but their character is always with them. And so the character is a better guide to trying to understand them than anything else. The only problem is, as hard as it is to understand nature when we can look right at it, it's how much harder is it to understand the nature within us when we can't see it at all? It's invisible to us. All we can look at is people's behavior and try to work backwards. And this is the thing Donald likes to quote from Nietzsche, the captious inference that works backwards from the creation to the creator, from the action to the doer. Who would do this kind of a thing? What could cause this kind of a thing? He says it's risky business reasoning backwards like that, but it's really your only means of access to figure out the people around you. And we've been doing it our whole lives, getting to know the people around us. Right? We may not do it systematically, right? Angela's right. We do it well, we do it poorly, and it's, the Greeks were very clear about this. It's an iffy thing to try to figure out who these people are around us. And we get it wrong a lot, even about ourselves. But we've been working at it our whole lives. I mean, from the time you're an infant, you're trying to figure out why one parent comes when you cry and the other one doesn't. We've been modeling the people around us as though our lives depend on it. Because they do, right? We're caught in a web of dependencies and relationships. So Heraclitus says we need to be students of both the nature around us and the nature within us. And the thing about them both is that they both are manifestations of nature itself, even if it's too subtle for us to see the relationship between the subjective world inside of us and the objective world around us. And I'm putting quotation marks around subjective and objective, right? Because moderns like to talk about those things like they're opposites. Subjective is irrational and not real, and it's fakey and fantasy, and we don't like that in our governments and our theories and our algorithms. But objective we're obsessed with, things you can measure and count. And it's like that's the real stuff, and that's how our laws are written. And of course, what Kenneth is doing in this intro is saying that distinction is insane. We think it's all important and that it's perfectly obvious, but it's insane. And one of the ways you know it's insane is that when we do things, we do them because they make sense to us. And that making sense is a subjective behavior, a subjective evaluation. No matter how persuaded we are that something is the right thing to do, it may still be the wrong thing to do. And there may be plenty of other people who could see that it was the wrong thing to do. They've got the truth right there. They could even be saying it to our faces, but we're persuaded that it's the right thing to do. And so even when we're looking the evidence in the face and it's all around us, we still turn away from it and say, nope, you can't make me. I'm going to create a fascist state and you can't stop me. And this is surely going to end in a utopia. And then it doesn't. And then we're surprised. This is all storytelling is about Oedipus Tyrannus, right? Over and over and over, people try to bring him the truth. Over and over, character after character gives him hints and nudges and please, for the love of God, stop looking. You don't want to know the answer, Oedipus. He's like, nope, I'm not hearing it. I am an objective searcher of the objective truth, and I'm going to bring the truth to light. And that can only end well. Of course, it doesn't end well. And it never was going to end well, but he couldn't see it, despite the fact that he prided himself on his objectivity. So this is the condition that we're in the natural world, where we discredit character. This is what the whole intro is about. He says, before you read what in effect, what Kenneth is saying is, before you read the rest of this paper, you need to deal with the reality that you aren't going to like it. And you aren't going to like it because it's going to tell you that the thing that we have all agreed to ignore as unimportant and irrational and subjective, which is kind of a curse word, the way moderns use it when they're trying to be professional, that's the source of all the problems that we have in our society. Not because it's irrational, but because the people who claim to be objective can't possibly be objective. And the objective things that we have constructed in the world around us, we constructed out of our own subjective impulses and desires and ideologies and feelings. When Phil talks about nature one, Mother Nature's nature, versus nature two, the artificial societies that we create, and he talks about how human beings, and it's something I want to stress today, human beings evolved to do well in nature one. All natural organisms did. That's what the pressure of evolution was about. And yet we construct for ourselves a nature two that works differently than that. We're setting for ourselves an existentialist trap. However the benefits may be, and I'm all down for washing your hands before you do surgery on somebody. I mean, I get the artifice of an enormous amount of what we do can be beneficial, but it doesn't change the fact that it's not what we evolved to handle. And when we treat that nature two as though it is as authoritative or more than nature one, that's when civilizations topple themselves. They start to buy their own bullshit and believe that just because they've pronounced something means that the world is obliged to go that way. This is what Hannah Arendt talks about in her essay, Truth and Politics. We get confused about the difference between it's true that if I jump off the roof, I might break my leg, versus why don't we have a vote about whether my leg will break? And if everybody says it won't, then it won't. Political truth and existential truth are two fundamentally different kinds of truth, but we try to make them operate according to the same rules. So this existentialist tradition, all of this is coming out of this opening sentence, right? This existentialist tradition is trying to talk about the idea that your essence, your character, your inner nature has to be a subject of study, has to be a subject of discussion, and it has to be taken very seriously as the ultimate source of your behavior. And to pretend otherwise, to pretend that we're just programmable computers, or that we're, just eternal spokespeople for logic or the truth or mathematics is just fantasy role playing. I am the prophet of God, and I shall now tell you what God wants from you. Is no better or worse than saying, I speak for the truth. I speak for evolution. I speak for mathematics. No, you don't. No human being can. You speak for your own character, which evidently is diluted enough to have you confused about the difference between role playing and reality. All right, so we have to cultivate them both. Essence and essential in the existential sense does not mean important. It means character based. It means related to ethos, as in ethos anthropodaimon. It's related to teleology, the agency in us that pushes back against contingency and tries to drive in a direction that will allow us to satisfy our character, our urges, our longings. Our character wants to express itself. It needs to express itself. It's why, despite all the problems that gay people face when they come out, many of them report that even when they have been victimized horrendously after coming out, nevertheless, they just feel better. They just feel better. Not living a lie feels better to us. And that's not a gay thing. It's a character thing. We trust our character. Most of it, unless we've been taught otherwise, the natural impulse is to trust our character, that trust our intuition. That these things that feel important to us, it's natural to feel that they actually must be important. And if we can live a life that honors those things, then we feel like we're being true to ourselves. And it removes an enormous amount of cognitive dissonance that comes from always pretending and hiding and lying about what we believe and what we want. And we might do it anyway, and we might have to save our lives or to get ahead in society. But it doesn't feel good when we know we're being fake, when we know we're withholding and not being real with people. We have an impulse to be part of a society that will accept us as actually who we are. Or if it won't accept us, it should fight us. At least then we get to be who we actually are. All of this is, the Greeks understand this perfectly well, these impulses. But to the moderns, that's all irrational subjectivism. Can't possibly be important. Nothing to run a government around. Stephen, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yes, many years ago, I was walking along the streets of Melbourne and a guy tries to chat me up. Apparently, I wasn't too bad when I was about 20 years old or something like that. Anyway, he's a fairly interesting character. And so we become friends. And, I was walking along with him saying just what you said to him, that, this is the 1980s, you're free to come out of the closet. It must feel a lot better now. And he said, no, things are far worse. He said that the problem now is you get all these bee queens who have decided they're your leader. He said that the beauty of a culture where you had to live in the closet was they didn't have much room to maneuver. And that was one of the most important insights I ever came across, because right now, every little letter of the alphabet is in a group with a little Hitler in it saying, you're my troops, I own you, and we must fight on for our little cause. And which is exactly where Western culture, or particularly America, is at the moment, where every little group thinks its aims are tantamounts, which is why you're falling apart right now and why you have King Donald's trying to sort you out. It's beautiful. It's poetry in motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I suspect that the truth of a situation is somewhat more complicated than that, but it does make for an entertaining point of discussion. But of course, as I was sort of trying to suggest, it's not actually about LGBTQIA plus. That's not actually why I brought it up. I brought it up because that issue of not calling you in just a second, Angelina, because I know you got
Yeah,
a good
sorry.
point to make.
Yeah.
The issue is our need to act in accord with our character is so strong, regardless of what that character is, that when we consciously suppress it, we don't feel good. And it creates cognitive dissonance for us. It creates existential angst for us when we're having to be false to who we truly are. Um, and I only brought up LGBTQIA because coming out of the closet is an example that we've all seen. Um, Angelina, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, just about that idea of authenticity and kind of coming out. I wanted to write in the chat, but I thought it's easier if I just it's kind of connected to what Stephen was saying, but a completely different cultural context. Um, I mean, in Islam, there is the idea of nifaq, like the idea when a person claims to be of the Islamic faith, but they kind of secretly disbelieve, and that's quite widespread. Like my father's community here in the Middle East comes from a minority, which is too long to explain the Druze. If you know that, if you don't, it's okay. You might sleep better. But they perform taqiyya, which means that because for the Muslims, we're not Muslims. So with the Muslims, you do pretend that you're a Muslim, and with Christians, you pretend you're a Christian. And this is something that they have in the community for hundreds and hundreds of years. Firstly, yes, in order to survive. But my family members who live in places like Australia, US, France, Lebanon, etc., you still have people when they don't need to, they're not going to be persecuted in downtown Melbourne or Paris, right? But they still perform taqiyya. Like I still have aunts and cousins who pretend that they're Muslims with Muslim, and they'll pretend they're a Christian with a Christian. Um, so I sort of think like the idea of authenticity, the idea of role playing is also different from culture to culture. And just because you brought up like in the US, I have a couple of friends there who grew up in like very hardcore Seventh-day Adventist communities. And they left, but they didn't really leave publicly. They didn't come out. And it's funny that both friends said to me that they have a lot in common with ex-Muslims who also kind of, for whatever reasons, they actually prefer not to come out. Like maybe I know because I'm not in the community, and it's the same with Muslims, right? Because I'm not a part of the Muslim community, people will tell me, but they wouldn't tell people in that community. And it's the same with like people who come out of some of these cults, whether it's because of family or because they're not concerned about it. But yeah, I sort of think there are different, maybe even religious or social contexts whereby the notion of authenticity is also much more fluid. Like there's a lot of just play acting, and it's not something existential. Because I've asked family members about why they do that in a context where you really don't need to. And it's like, well, it's just why not? Like, and they get benefits for it, right? Like there are kind of social benefits for pretending that you're a Muslim with this person, you're a Christian with that person. And yeah, people who left the Seventh-day Adventist community, but there are some benefits of kind of whatever it could be, personal harmony with your parents, getting freebies from the community. I know one place, right? So
It's an excellent
yeah,
point. It's an excellent point, Angelina, and it goes right to the next piece of this. From the Greek perspective, the Greeks understood character and culture as being intimately related to each other. We don't. We think the culture is the culture, and your character is, we're not even sure what the character is supposed to be. Um, maybe personality, or maybe the fact that I collect unicorns, or I mean, we're really vague on what it might be. It's a non-thing for us. Culture, we sort of acknowledge, okay, there's films, and maybe sometimes we go see a play, and maybe that's culture. We're not sure what we mean by culture either. But the Greeks had a pretty clear understanding of these ideas, and they saw the relationship between the two it's in a feedback loop, right? Because you're born with some sort of genetic propensities in your character. It's one of the things that Kenneth talks about is the way, even though he and Angela were the same parents, their children grew up very differently from each other. And that was part of the way that they learned the power of character, is that They each express their upbringing in a different way because they were born with a different genetic component. And yet, if you put them all in a room together and somebody who didn't grow up in that family and never met them before was hanging out at a dinner with them, you could tell they all get along together. I mean, they've got a common shared culture. And so after the part that you're born into, that you're born with, you then have all this molding that takes place from your parents and your family and your friends and your schools and and so the culture shapes the character within the frame that whatever you were born with allows for, and it can become radically different. Certainly, it becomes radically more sophisticated than just the initial genetic impulses that you had in you. It shapes how they're going to be expressed. And certainly, that could be that the way to be the authentic self is to be able to be everybody to everything to everybody, to be able to become, a Muslim among Muslims and to be able to become a Christian among Christians. And if that's the culture that you're acculturated to, then that becomes your character to do that. It feels natural. It's like, why wouldn't you do that? Of course you do that. It makes perfect sense. And what I'm describing here isn't, my beliefs. I'm talking, Stephen in a post says Rick's too optimistic. I'm not talking about my beliefs. I'm talking about the ancient Greek ideas, and I'm talking about, what Kenneth Smith is talking about in this paper. What's the background? When he says, and remember, we're on the first sentence of paragraph 14. What can all this mean as a manifestation of the inner shape of personality and human essence? Time. Well, we're talking about the word essence. Because Stephen, for the past few months, has been talking about all the times he runs into people who use the word essence or essential in ways that are just sloppy and all over the place. So, because it's the centerpiece of this sentence, I needed to take a little bit of time to clarify that when Kenneth talks about essence or essential, he's not using it the way moderns use it to mean something that's important. He's using it the way the ancient Greeks use it to mean something that is about your character, something that is a better North Star to understand who you are than your height or your eye color or some catchphrase that you like to say. Those things are just characterization. But the drives within you, whether you were born with them, whether you were taught them by your family, whether it's a combination of the two, which is what it always is, almost. It's to understand you. That's the more essential part. And Aristotle flat out says it. And Plato and Socrates illustrate it in the dialogues over and over. Heraclitus says it. This is core to the ancient perception of the world. Everything is an organism, even the chair or a rock is an organism. And every organism has its external nature that is obvious and an internal nature that is harder to see. And that's what it is to be an organism. And that internal nature is itself also an organism. It is growing and changing over time. It has its own inner laws of development that are going to make it, try to express itself in the ways that it understands how. And in Homo sapiens, part of what that means is absorbing a lot of culture because we are the cultural animal. And absorbing a lot of culture means it can be very hard you basically can't predict from a baby who somebody's going to grow into. There's so many influences that are going to feed into them. And some of that they will push back against because that's also in our nature. But some of it they'll take in and make it part of themselves. And it could be a dramatically different part from what you thought that they would take in. But now there it is. And now it's part of their character. These are highly complex issues. So from this perspective, if we acknowledge that character shapes culture and culture shapes character, it's a back and forth dialectic and feedback loop, then what that means is that the products of our culture, our houses, our cars, our legal codes, our economy, all these things that we take to be objective, they have the same relationship to our subjective selves as character and culture have to each other. Culture shapes character. Character manifests within cultures. The subjective manifests in the objective world. Donald sits down to write a program, and after he's done, the program objectively exists. But before he did that, it wasn't anywhere. It came out of his subjectivity. Homo faber, man the maker. Homo sapiens is an animal that makes things. We're an animal that projects the irrational, unimportant, flighty, subjective part that we all pretend doesn't exist in the modern world. We project it until it becomes objective around us. We change the world. We shape the world with our subjectivity. until it becomes a reflection of the inner self. I don't know how many people saw Star Trek the Motion Picture back in 77, was it? 78, 79? Dear God, one of those years. But there's a scene in it where they're flying into this giant alien cloud, and it's a sentient thing, and it's got a machine inside of itself, and the machine is bigger than our solar system. It's inconceivably large, and it has absorbed its experiences, all its journeys across the universe. It stores inside of itself in a holographic memory. And its memory is so large that they're flying inside of it in the Starship Enterprise. It's like Asimov's, incredible, fantastic journey where people shrink down and go inside of the blood vessels of a person to go get rid of a blood clot. I think it is. I can't remember exactly what they're trying to save an important person on whom the piece of the world depends. In the same way, in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the Enterprise hasn't been shrunk down, but it's okay. Yeah, sure. A giant uterus, says Jason. That works as a metaphor. 79. Thank you, Stephen. So they're actually flying inside the memory of this alien being, and they're seeing these large images of galaxies and planets that are from far away that the Enterprise has never seen, but that this alien V'ger has seen. And what's remarkable is one of the things that the alien did. If you haven't seen the film, I'm about to spoil it, and I'm sorry, but it killed one of their crew members. They just thought it killed her, but actually it absorbed her. And they know because when they're flying inside the memories, they see her, gigantic, bigger than the Enterprise, and all of her memories and experiences have been incorporated into V'ger. And so all this subjective stuff that we think is unimportant, V'ger is trying to understand it and has made it persis combata. Thank you, Stephen. Yes, playing the role of Ilea, has become objective in the largest possible sense, and that not only does it physically exist, it's bigger than the Enterprise, it's bigger than the Earth. And that serves as a metaphor for what all Homo sapiens do all the time. Everything that we make is a product of our subjectivity that has been made objective. And thus, it's just not safe for us to keep pretending that the subjective world doesn't matter when we keep recreating the subjective world outside of ourselves in objective form. That's the source. It's like people who say, I don't want to know about acorns. I only want to know about oaks because, oaks are the important part. They generate acorns. It's like, yeah, but it's the other way around too. The acorns generate the oaks. If you don't understand where the oak tree comes from, you don't really understand the oak tree. And the same is absolutely true of the objective world that we create. If you don't want to understand human character, you're never going to understand all these things that our character is driving us to create. This is his warning in the intro to this paper. He's saying, as moderns, we're taught that the subjective doesn't matter, but this paper is all about the subjective because the subjective does matter. And the idea that it doesn't is an ideology that we have mistaken for the truth. Of course it matters. The Greeks knew it mattered. Christians knew it mattered. We're the only epoch that hallucinates the idea that what's in here doesn't matter. Only the measurable. So, all right. Let's go on to sentence 2, hour and a half in, right? But these are hard concepts. They take some wrestling, and they're connected to other things. And the temptation is to pull in everything and get sidetracked. But we want to pull it in without getting sidetracked. Second sentence. So he says, the whole world of culture, of course, is something man does to himself, draws out of himself, aims toward, obeys implicitly as his own intimate voice to himself, and is thus fulfilled by, regardless of how he is penalized or self-alienated by it.
These are the appetites, right?
Its appetites are part of our character, but so are our ideologies. The things we've been trained to do well have become part of our character. Anesthesia and how to manage anesthesia teams is not something Sharon was born with. She had to get it acculturated within herself through a process first of education and then of decades of practice. But she did. And now anesthesiology is in her character. not just appetites. The appetites are part of it. Our experiences are part of it. You know, if you were the only person one day who saw in the backyard when a rare bird landed on the bush next to you and your jaw dropped and you said, "Oh my God, that bird doesn't live here. What the hell is that bird doing here?" And then it flies away and you never see it again. And you try to tell other people about it and they don't believe you because they know that bird doesn't live here. But the thing is, as Hannah Arendt says in her essay on truth and politics, in Between Past and Future, the second edition, she says, it's not up for a vote. That really did happen. This is the difference between existential truth and political truth. Political truth is up for a vote. Existential truth is not. And if you experienced it, if you experienced a piece of existential truth, you are its, witness. You are the person who knows that that was a real thing. And if it was important to you, like the first time you stand at the Grand Canyon and it knocks you off your feet with how big it is, it can imprint itself on your character and become important to you. It could become a frame of reference for you. And if that seems obscure, well, why would a particular encounter with a bird become part of your character? Remember that character controls what you notice and what you care about. And some little part of you, all the rest of your life, as you go through your life in that town where that bird can't possibly exist, you're the only person in the town who's watching for the bird because you saw it once. So other people will miss it because they know it's not there. If it flew by and it was just a brief glimpse, they would chalk it up to being some bird that does live here. You would be the only person who could catch that brief glimpse and arrive at the conclusion, oh my God, there it is again. Because your character was shaped by the experience to make you notice. This is that thing, right, that we talk about. Character it controls your conscious mind by controlling what you care about, controlling what you notice, controlling what is on the Chinese menu that your conscious mind picks from and thinks about, right? Your conscious mind can do all kinds of powerful things with the things that it selects, but it's not in charge of arranging the initial set of selections to begin with. That all comes from the character. And likewise, why are you persuaded by this and not by that? Somebody else would hear this and they'd be persuaded, but you're not. Why? It's because of your character. To be persuaded by, to find something persuasive is an emotional, subjective experience. No matter how many, hyper intellectuals try to paint it as a strictly rational process, it's the opposite of rational. Why did you stop your logical argument at this point? Why didn't you keep going? Well, because you were persuaded. Why were you persuaded? It's a circular argument. I'm persuaded because that's my character. That's why at this moment, this was enough for me. This is the point when I said, aha, I have it. Somebody else would look at the exact same logical argument and go, you do not have it. And I go, oh, come on. I totally have it. I know I have it because I feel I have it, because my character tells me I have it. And my character might be right. They might all be wrong. But, that's not up to them and it's not up to me either. It's up to reality. So this issue here that we're talking about, this idea that in a sense we spin, he says draws out of himself. He's talking about a spider, right? Man the weaver, who spins out of himself a world, right? In the same way a storyteller spins tales, we spin this objective world out of our subjective longings and desires and memories and training and so forth. This is we spin nature too, our artificially constructed habitat, out of our actual inner nature. We make it manifest. How do you know someone's a serial killer? They go around killing people. And it doesn't matter what your logical argument is, right? It doesn't matter if you liked him. It doesn't matter if he was charismatic. None of the other things matter. He's actually doing the thing. And he's doing the thing because it's in his character to do that thing. And if it wasn't in his character, he wouldn't do it. I mean, you can accidentally kill someone once, maybe, possibly twice if you're extraordinarily unlucky, but no one accidentally, murders co-eds time after time after time for 14 years. Oops, I did it again. This is not something that happens by accident. It's character. It is your subjective inner self trying to express itself through your behavior. And this is perfectly understandable to the Greeks and to the existentialist and Kenneth Smith, but it doesn't make any sense at all to moderns. We don't want character to be real. We don't want subjectivity to be real. We only want things you can measure with a ruler to be real. Geneva, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Um, yeah, this is a really interesting discussion. And it makes me wonder when you talk about character, intuition, subjectiveness, if that is somehow tied to or connected to determinism in some way. I'm
This is the good stuff.
curious.
This is the good
What was
stuff.
that?
This is the good stuff, Geneva. You're asking a good question there. This is
Hmm,
this is where
that's
moderns are the most confused.
yeah, I could see why. Yeah,
Because if we don't believe in character, then
yeah.
why does an alcoholic crawl into a bottle?
Mm,
He
hmm
must have chosen to be bad. He must have chosen. This is right. How much moralizing is there in the law code? Punish that guy because he chose to be bad. Well, did he choose? I mean, was it a free choice or is that his character? Right? To what extent was he made that way? To what extent was he born that way? You know, there are times when we choose, and there are times when the choice is even, I could have flipped a coin. It doesn't really
mm,
necessarily matter. Of course there are. But there's other times when we choose the way that we have to choose because that's who we are. And and we'll always choose that way. Oh, Kate Hunter's asking, these sessions last for 3 hours. So we're an hour and a half in, we'll go another hour and a half. This is every Monday. So good question. So for Geneva's benefit, yeah, we're gonna that's what we're digging into. This week and next week, we're totally getting into this question of free will and determinism because it's what's all over this paper. He's saying that the Greeks say that from their observations, people fall into three types of characters. And that doesn't make them clones of each other. It's not like we have three models of clones. It's not like Brave New World, where people only come in three models, but rather that there's three gravity wells that we orbit around. Each of us orbits in our own way, expressing our individuality, but kind of trapped by the center of gravity that keeps drawing us back to thinking that this is the right source of answers. Is the right source of answers how I feel and what I've experienced and what I remember? Then I'm a doulos, right? Is the center of gravity for my for how I make decisions what I have learned and how I think about the world, my training, my systems of laws and logic and economies, then I'm a Banausos. And and if I listen to and closely study both of those sources of information, but I don't let either of them be my center of gravity. If I'm always treating them like potential addictions that I have to work hard to stay out of, to not let master me, and that I have to be skeptical about both sets of messages, the ones coming from the dualic side of my nature and the ones coming from the Banausic side of my nature. I'm oversimplifying here just to keep it simple. If that's the case, then I'm an Aristos. But for there to be Aristoi, there would have to be examples of Aristoi for us to learn how to do that from. And his point in this paper is that modernity has squashed Aristoi. We don't have any conspicuous examples. We only have conspicuous examples of lots and lots of douloi and educated intellectual banausoi. And those are the two choices that were offered. And so all Aristoi have to either convince them proto-Aristoi, not actual Aristoi. Any potential Aristoi are going to grow up thinking that one or the other of those paths must be the right path. And if they don't, they're going to feel like a misfit all their life. They're not going to fit in anywhere. And they're going to be uncomfortable and they may be economically or physically punished. As he's going to say in this paper, to be an Aristos in the modern world is to be, well, this goes to Ari's question, it's facing characterological genocide. And so going to Angelina's point, any proto-Aristoi learn to pass, learn how to mimic a doulos, learn how to mimic a banausos, right? Because you're allowed to survive if you're a doulos or a banausos. There's a place for you in society. But if you're a troublemaker, if you're a nail that sticks up, you're going to get hammered down. So you learn not to do that, or you end up dead or in jail or homeless, mental institution. I think those are my four options. He's going to cite at least two of those options in this paper. Free will versus determinism. We'll come back to it over and over and over. This is where the whole paper is about this question. It's good stuff. It's complicated. It's tricky. It's tricky.
Well, yeah, it sounds like it because where does that come from? You're kind of born with it. You may grow into it. You may enhance it, but somehow it's already there.
Yes.
So how?
This is
Sounds like, yeah.
medieval theoreticians used to cut open acorns looking for little oaks inside.
Huh.
When
Okay.
microscopes discovered the microscopic world, people used to fantasize, and they discovered the existence of eggs and sperm. People used to fantasize that inside the egg would be a little person, or inside the sperm would be a little person. And they cut them open looking for them, and they couldn't find them, and they didn't understand it. The medieval idea was more that things are what they are, and they're not what they're not. He made each according to its kind stuff from Genesis, got a lot of medieval thinkers into expecting that you can't have radical metamorphosis and transformation. And it's why there was often a split between urban theologians versus rural peasants who, every rural peasant knew that butterflies and caterpillars are related to each other and it goes through a metamorphosis and a chrysalis. The concept of metamorphosis is something that if you will let yourself be in nature one, in close proximity, nature will teach you about metamorphosis because it's going to show it to you over and over and over. And so the idea that our own character goes through processes of transformation and development is something that we can be prepared for if we spend enough time in the real world encountering examples of metamorphosis. Then the idea is in our head, and then we can recognize it when we see it in ourselves. But if we spend all our time, in academic theories or isolation, separated from nature one, hiding within nature two, then we might not get enough of those examples because the honest truth is that radical metamorphosis doesn't make sense. It's not logically nice. The idea that here are my propositions, and now I'm going to leap to a conclusion you never could have predicted from these propositions. This is what happens when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. Unless you have the tools to look deeply into the caterpillar and see the potential. If you had never watched it happen before, you never could have predicted it would happen. There's nothing about the caterpillar that says, I'm going to grow wings and fly around. This is of interest to me because I've got some caterpillars for the first time. I've been trying for some years. I'm trying to turn my backyard into a backyard wildlife refuge, and I actually managed to get some little caterpillars. I say I managed. They managed to find a plant that I've been growing back there in the hopes that someone would colonize it, and they're on it. And they're rolling up their little nests to hide inside of while they munch on the leaves. And I don't know what they're going to turn into. I'm still trying to figure out what kind of caterpillar they are. But it's going to be an educational moment for me to observe the metamorphosis, to actually see it happen and not just in a book or in a video or what have you, not just theorize about it. So free will and determinism is a complicated thing. And we're going to explore that in this paper, I promise you. By the time we're done, your questions about it will be answered. And there's no way I could do justice to your question in the brief time I have today. It's going to take some sessions to unpack. And it's because there's all these dialectics involved. It's because there's all these feedback loops involved. It's because there's multiple sources that pour into our character. And it makes it complicated. And when things get complicated, we lose the thread. Unless Ariadne gives us a clue. Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, this is interesting. Really quickly, I'll be brief because I'm not in the best place to have this discussion. But the idea that I think you're bringing up with the relationship of understanding that the subjective creates the objective is really important because people that look at the flaw or look at the gap that exists between the subjective and the objective as a flaw as opposed to a feature. Because what happens is you start to then look at yourself within a culture, within circumstances, and then you look at a set, that's nothing more than a set of patterns that you have. And what happens is then you then carve out a role for yourself in these patterns, and you become the role. And as opposed to, so this is somebody that may have a job, that they oh, this is what I am. This is who I am, you know, and it's like, no, that's not who you are. And it's this desire to uh, to have certainty that you have an absolute, like, kind of static way, and this is where nature kind of comes in. So when things change, you resist the change as opposed to embrace it. Um, but the problem with this whole thing is that you start to say that you no longer ask yourself the question, or you question your own premises about the world. You assume that you're absolutely right and that you have absolute truth. And in that, things become static, and that's where, things become fixed. And what you were saying a little bit earlier is how sometimes these systems that are unable to adapt because they die, that because nature is going to impose its will. What people are trying to do is impose their will on nature, and then nature comes back at them. And but it's all this idea that of looking at ourselves as fixed, something that is fixed in the world. This is the objective world, and this is what it is. And once you start looking at the world through a fixed lens, I mean, there's been a lot of psychological studies about this too. People that are willing to cheat, that that are, kind of look at the identity of them taking the test as opposed to learning. Just even how they frame these two different things. One person will say, well, I haven't passed it yet and I need to learn more. And they're looking at it. And the other person looks at it as a pass fail. And they look at it as a very objective measure. And if you don't, if you didn't get a X number score, then you fail. And those individuals are willing to game the system. They're willing to cheat because it's a fixed, because there's a right and wrong. There's no room for growth, no room for adaptability in that. But it all comes back to this idea of the inability to see that the subject creates the objective. It's not objective. So, that any kind of uncertainty then needs to be stomped out. So it's an interesting point, because, and I mean, is again, if you look at yourself through culture and things like that, you stop asking yourself the question: is it the culture or is it me? You're not going to ask that question anymore. You just become part of this fixed entity, and then with that comes a whole lot less compassion and things like that. But I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Joe. Part of what you're describing is the difference between one of the big differences between the classical worldview and the modern worldview is the modern worldview likes a universe full of things. Billiard balls, right? Newtonian physics and everything derived from it has been described as billiard balls knocking against each other in predictable ways. And we like that model because it's predictable. We want the feeling of control. We want to feel like gods. And to feel like gods, we need things to hold still and be predictable. But if things are all squirming around, transforming all the time, we don't like that at all. Because now you can't predict it. And if you can't predict it, you can't feel like you're in control. And so the hallucination that we're like gods, or that people would mistake us for gods, and we want the admiration after the fact of, the medievals and the ancients. See how cool we are. We fly airplanes. It's like, yeah, but you're idiots. It's sure we may be able to do these things, but we don't know when we should or should not do them, as Hannah Arendt says. And frequently and this is one of my very favorite quotes from her is from the Open Human Condition. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess you froze up a little bit there, didn't you? She has this great sentence where she says, "It could be that we who have begun to think of ourselves as dwellers in the universe are nevertheless unable to understand. We are unable to understand the things which we are nevertheless able to do. We can do things that we can't understand, and that is a dangerous condition for us to be in, because it severs the feedback loop with nature. If we can't feel the consequences of our actions, then how are we supposed to learn when we do something wrong?
Right.
So, this is the thing is Newton gives us an approximation, but built into it is this concept of, the little kid knocking over a tower of blocks. Everything is a block. People are blocks. Character is a block, if it's anything at all. Laws are it's all just blocks, and we just arrange it and hit each other over the head with them. And the Greeks are just sitting there shaking their heads, going, nothing is a thing. Everything has laws of transformation inside of it. Everything has its
Mhm.
lawfulness inside of it. Even an electron, and you don't get much simpler than an electron. It's a fundamental particle, but even it's not a block. It has a charge. It has behavior and desire. It doesn't have a neuron, but it has desire. It is going to attempt to link up with something positive to help it balance out. And its teleology to do that is powerful, you know?
Right.
Over the course of the universe, sooner or later, it will find its proton. And you can only delay it. You can't just stop it. I mean, it's going to be around long after we've died. We aren't here to stop it anymore. So, this is tricky stuff. And the natural result of that is that when moderns acknowledge that anything like character or the mind exists, the first thing they want to do is turn it into objects in a machine, because we can't
Right.
stand the idea of actual squirmy, gooey, metamorphosing organisms. It's just, ew, it's so messy. How can I role play?
Character's character's not even an option.
Right.
I mean, because the idea that it has to be this way.
Yes.
So, and so that the individual to be able to even ask themselves a question whether this is the right thing to do is completely removed. And so, I mean, and yeah, if there's no inquiry, I mean, there's no self-inquiry, there's no inquiry even about other people, whether or not you're doing something the right thing anyway.
Right. Right. That failure to
Yeah.
inquire, that thing where we learn, oh, this is boring. That's not interesting. There's nothing to see here. That's how a worldview polices our minds to keep us from seeing the parts of reality that would contradict the ideology. There's
Right.
nothing to see here. It's boring. Move along. And it's almost always the sign that, in fact, there is something to see here. And whatever it is so important that our ideology couldn't survive if we were to look clearly into that lacuna and see the thing that's being erased, from our perspective by the ideology. Um, what if we aren't gods? What if it's not all under our control? What if we're not the smartest possible thing? If those things are true, just the simple little seemingly rhetorical questions I just said, then they disprove capitalism, they disprove democracy, they disprove most of the things the modern world is built out of, depend on the assumption of the reasonable man theory, enlightened
Right.
self-interests, the class interests, the idea that if you're a member of a class, you automatically know what your interests are,
Right.
which Marx never said, but generations of Marxists since then have all said it. Of course the working class would fight for their interests. They would never support someone who's exactly antagonistic to their own interests. That could never happen. Yeah, well, behold the world we're in, right? I mean, it's like
Right.
it's obvious that it can happen. It's obvious that it's all more complicated than our tidy little theories want it to be. And the only reason that we don't acknowledge it when we're in political and philosophical debates is it's it's blasphemy. It violates our concept of ourselves in the universe at too fundamental. It makes us too uncomfortable. And as a result, we're like, I'd rather talk about anything but that. Let's talk about the new movie. How about that sports team?
Right. Right. That's right.
Anything but this topic. Uh,
Right.
I was having a conversation with a family member about a month ago. Last one I've had with them in depth for a while, and there was a point where they interrupted me, and I was questioning something, and they interrupted me and said, That's why everybody hates philosophy. You just keep it's so annoying to be asking these questions." Like, I know. It's
Right.
annoying because that's how our ideologies prevent us from asking the questions.
We pervert the feedback loop.
They
I
pervert
mean,
feedback.
that's what if you don't ask questions, then your feedback loop is fixed, and then obviously that is not how things work. I mean, that's not how signals work. That's not how nature. It's nothing. Right. So, and that's where you got to die.
Yeah. Yeah, when someone is ideologized, and we all are. Anybody who thinks that they see objectively, but other people suffer ideologies, does not understand the modern world. We're all swimming in ideologies. Countless,
Right.
uncountable numbers of ideologies are in us at all times, working on us. And that's part of what it means to be modern. So it means that each one of them is playing a bunch of shell games hiding parts of reality from us. And they don't all agree with each other about which parts of reality to hide. So, depending on which ideology is foremost in our mind right now, we may or may not be able to see something that in a different mood we can't see at all. It's a complicated, confusing state to be in. I mean, you could imagine trying to make a movie out of this. You'd end up with one of those weird avant-garde films where the viewer's like, what the hell is even happening here? That's what it's like to be so deeply ideologized. Um, and the idea that that's in us is so anathema to most people that if you try to bring up the subject, they get annoyed, they get irritated, they get bored, they get anything except interested because their ideologies, recognize the threat. This thought has to be pushed down right now. We got to get rid of this one. Change the
Right.
subject. Reach for the remote. Time to move on, buddy. We can't be talking about this
That's
stuff.
right.
So okay, so let's take this to the text, right? So we're
Thank you.
talking about this idea, and thank you for bringing that up. We're talking about this idea that we have this character in us. It wants to fulfill itself. Regardless of how we're penalized or self-alienated from it. We talked about this idea of man, the spinner, who's spinning out an objective reality, supposedly objective reality, that is nevertheless the manifestation of our subjective impulses. So, I mean, it's objective, but it's also subjective at the same time. Right, when we did our bit on Heraclitus, didn't we say the more you understand Heraclitus, the more you come to understand it in his world of the view, there is no solid ground. It's just paradoxes all the way down. It's almost the signature of Mother Nature. You've gotten out of the ideologies into Mother Nature when you've moved on from simple statements and contradictions to truly deep, profound paradoxes. And so this idea that that the objective and the subjective can't be separated the way that we try to do as moderns, that they are all tangled up with each other. At least where Homo sapiens is concerned, they're tangled up with each other. This is part of the smell that we're on the hunt of reality. So the peril, there is an existential peril in having us, of all the species in the world, us be the one that's spinning our subjectivity out. Homo faber to construct a supposedly objective world. And that is, we don't have sophrosune. I mean, right? When a butterfly spins out its subjective life into the objective world through its behavior, it ends up pollinating flowers and reproducing. The species survives, the plant species survive, everything does well because of the subjective nature of the butterfly and its sophrosune. And the same is true for every other organism in its native habitat. That is what it means to have a native habitat, is that this is the place where your behavior makes sense. Your impulses and urges make sense, is here. But we're the one that had the evolutionary trick of stripping out sophrosune and replacing it with acculturation. Acculturation teaches us intuition and it teaches us enthusiasms. And we try to use intuition and enthusiasms to compensate for the lack of sophrosune. But there can be no comparison because we can be acculturated into almost anything. Kenneth loves to make this point. He says there are, most species cannot be acculturated into doing things that are fundamentally alien to its character. The sophrosune pushes too hard, right? It knows what it wants to be doing, and it wants it a lot. It feels the urge. When the light fades, the deep sea jellyfish rise to the surface. The darkness feels like time to rise. And they're correct. That is the time to go up. The predators are sleeping now. Go up and do your jellyfish things up at the surface. This is the best time to do it. But we could be persuaded of anything. If we were jellyfish, but we had a human nature, we could be persuaded to go up when it's light out. And then the predators eat us and we're surprised. Because acculturated intuition and acculturated enthusiasms are no replacement for sophrosune. Self-persona is the product of billions of years of evolution. Culture just hasn't been around that long. And especially since human beings have begun manufacturing our own cultures based on our own ideologies, it's even more fraught with peril. There may not even be thousands of years behind the idea that we're acculturating with somebody with. It may have just come out of a think tank last spring. Somebody wrote a white paper and said, okay, let's try it out. It could be the worst idea in the world. And next thing you know, all the media is pushing it. And half the people are lapping it up and it becomes part of themselves and they all act on this thing and ruin everything. We are an awfully volatile, we have an awfully volatile character to be spinning our subjectivity out into the world. There's a reason why when we do that, we don't just get gardens. We also get nuclear meltdowns and genocides. These are also part of our volatile, unrooted, unhinged nature. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I was Angelina's bringing up this issue of corporate crime, and David Riol and I were discussing Carol Quigley, his work Tragedy and Hope. And of course, if you read Quigley, his grand ideal is that the corporates, the bankers, are planning to create a global entity, a global ruler. And he's all in favour of it. He's very much the opposite of Oswald Spengler. Oswald Spengler is somebody who likes Nietzsche, somebody who likes the Greek tradition you're talking about. But Carol Quigley is very much the modern, that the bankers will all get together and they'll create the perfect worlds. Now, the point is, when we talk about conspiracies, we always talk about conspiracies as if everything about the conspiracy comes from the cognitive, that they absolutely are doing what they're doing out of purely cognitive motives. But the question here is they've left out the affection, the feeling, and they've left out the volitional, the will, as being part of the motives. Now you get a whole gang of bankers together at Davros or whatever, and they're making plans for the world. I don't think it's purely a product of their cognitive outlook. It's a product of their instincts, because they live their whole life as bankers. Therefore, they see the world through banker-coloured glasses. And they actually believe they can pull it off because it seems to have worked from their angle for so long. Spengler would say that they underestimate the power of what they don't know. You've got this enormous elite who's making plans for the world, but they are unaware of things outside their character.
I'm not sure.
They are
I'm not sure
unaware
if
that character is fate.
maybe they don't have any character. That's why they're bankers.
Well, they certainly do have a character. That's where you're wrong. All persons almost have a character, even the very worst. The person we like to look down upon has a character, and in certain circumstances, that character can be useful.
Even a rock has a character, even electron.
I don't know if we're going to go that far, Rick.
Well, it's very rocky, right? I mean, a rock is not a pudding. It's got its own character.
Is that a property or is that a character?
The Greeks would say yes. Well, properties
okay.
are part of the character.
Okay, now I know the Greeks have been smoking something. Thank you.
It's all organisms, man, all the way down. Actually, there have been some interesting studies that suggest the Greeks did do hallucinogens. If you haven't read the book, The Greeks and the Irrational, you should try it out. The stuff about We read a lot about Greek religion. We don't spend nearly enough time looking at Greek religion. Some of it's pretty weird. Uh, but yeah, their idea is, certainly a living organism's character is more interesting to us than, say, a piece of quartz. But a piece of quartz has its own character. It's why the light passes through it the way it does. It's just its response to, a stone's response to almost everything is just to sit there. There are
Well,
very few things that make a stone respond differently.
if you're a banker, the world is only a financial market.
Yes. Yes.
This isn't purely cognitive.
No.
This is getting down to affection and volition.
Kenneth would agree with you 100% on this.
But everybody thinks the conspiracy is cognitive alone, that people are absolutely making choices out of the cognitive. They think of Hitler and think that all the choices he made were purely the cognitive, while at the same time saying he was mad.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting point that evolutionary biologists have made as well. It's like, why does the swordfish and the ichthyosaurus and the dolphin look alike? Did they get together and form a conspiracy? No, they did not. They live a certain kind of life that imposes certain kinds of pressures, and those pressures only have a limited number of solutions. And these three organisms, which came from entirely different branches of the animal kingdom, nevertheless were forced by the pressures that were upon them to converge upon the same solutions. You can't be a high-speed apex predator in the ocean without getting that streamlined body and that tail to propel you like a torpedo through the water. And what Stephen's saying is absolutely in line with what Kenneth's saying in this paper, which is in line with the Greeks and Nietzsche and the rest, which is when you share a worldview, you don't even have to talk to each other to do things that are compatible with each other because you share the worldview. You see the problems the same way, and that means there's a limited number of ways to see the solution. When it comes to character versus characteristics, part of where the difference comes in is are we talking about something that determines its behavior? So the fact that we've used this example before, a cunningly painted and sculpted stone designed to look like a turtle will behave very differently when it gets rained on than an actual turtle. And the reason for that difference is that the character of the living organism is to attend closely to the world and respond to it as it sees fit. Whereas the character of the stone is just to sit there and resist. But the stone won't always sit there and resist. You get the temperature high enough, and what happens to the turtle is radically different from what happens to the stone. The stone becomes lava. And no turtle will ever do that. That is a part of the stone behavior. That's part of its realm of behavior. Just like it is in the character of an electron to try to find the missing positive charge to balance it out. So there's a level at which when your behavior becomes incredibly automatic, it is just a characteristic, right? I mean, because it's so predictable. You could simply write it down on a piece of paper and always be right. But when you start getting into living organisms, it starts to get so complicated, you can't do that anymore. And that's when, in the modern world, we would start to admit that there's some subjectivity there. And the Greeks sidestepped this whole thing by saying subjectivity is part of character. It's all the things that are intrinsic to you that determine your behavior are in your character. And so it cuts across definitional boundaries in ways that moderns wouldn't do. We're always trying to preserve the objective versus subjective split, relevant versus irrelevant, and so on. And the Greeks are like, they're not interested in those lines. Those are our lines. Angelina, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I guess this is maybe depends on your. I mean, I just wrote a question there about vibrant materialism. Isn't there this book by I haven't read it to be honest, but a few people have spoken about it to me. Jane Bennett, and yeah, the idea that like inanimate objects kind of have this character, and I think it's kind of connected to that school of thought. But I mean, I kind of get it. Let's say with the philosopher's stone, it's a metaphor, therefore it has character. Yeah, it's a metaphor for, I don't know, cosmic purity and whatever else. Yeah, I think it's kind of a little bit problematic in the sense of yeah, I mean, like in archaeology, for example, yeah, a stone might have, as you call it, a character or a life, but only in relation to humans. I guess I find this idea, that's why I question this, because it seems a little bit new age-ish, like Jane Bennett.
Yeah, the New Agey version would say it's all about us. The ancient Greek version would say it has nothing to do with us. It's they're going to do like the stone's going to do what the stone's going to do, regardless of whether we like it or not. The Greeks were clearer that nature has authority over us. We may wish we had authority over nature, and we may think that when we go out and cut down a tree or turn a bunch of stones into a castle that we've demonstrated that we're the master. But the first asteroid to come along proves us wrong. We're really in a sandbox that's older and bigger than we are, and everything is more complicated than we think it is. Think about all the people in ancient times who had no idea what uranium was. They just pick up a stone and stick it in their pocket and they die of cancer and they have no idea why. What stone has behavior, right? It is radioactive. It is irradiating. And it has that behavior whether we understand it or not and whether we like it or not. It's going to do what it's going to do.
But I mean, I guess maybe I'm looking at this from I don't know, a certain form of materialism, because for me that's still characteristics. It does what it does because it has these particular properties, right? Determined by its solid mass and its yeah, chemical substances and components. But I don't know if I would call that character.
Well, we
I
wouldn't,
guess it's, yeah.
but that's not a modern use of the word. So of course we
But
wouldn't.
it has come back into modern use. Like Bennett is a good example of that. But yeah,
Yeah.
I question that whole school.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of Bennett before. Thank you for pointing me at her.
I haven't read it because I think it's a load of, but people
Yeah.
have told me that.
Yeah, it might
Maybe
be,
I
but
should after this conversation. Yeah, maybe.
well, let's put it this way. So our definitions are designed to satisfy our expectations. Moderns are perfectly happy rearranging our categories and definitions to fit our preconceptions and then denying we did it. Right? This is this objective subjective thing. So we define things in ways that we are certain are objective, when in fact all they are is consistent with our earlier draft of our theory. And I'll give you an example. It can cause enormous problems. This is, and I bring it up because not just because of your question, but it's a perfect illustration of the power that character has over the way we see the world. So the modern definition of life, you can look it up on Wikipedia, right? There's a list of characteristics, and it includes reproduction, and it includes, sensing in the environment and responding to things. It involves a metabolism. We've got a list. And in our definition of life, the smallest building block of life that is considered alive is a single cell. And that definition has been our definition for a long time. Science is absolutely committed to it. This is what life is. The problem is it's based on the notion of an absolute separation of the living from the dead. There are things that are absolutely alive, and there are things that are absolutely not alive. And there's nothing in between, and that satisfies everything. A rock cannot be alive because that would interfere with our definition. Whereas a cell has to be alive because our definition requires it. And what this does is set us up for an enormous amount of problems when we look at viruses. Is a virus alive or is a virus not alive? Now, you can read, at this point, 60 years of scientific papers of biologists arguing to death whether it's one or the other, or somehow sometimes one and sometimes the other, or a little of both. And the whole thing is artificial. That problem would not exist if we hadn't drawn the lines where we did. The rock can't be alive. The turtle must be alive. And let's not talk about viruses. Just look away. Look away from the viruses, and our categories won't have a problem. We also see this problem in the evolution of life on Earth. And this is, you can look up the Wikipedia article on abiogenesis. How did Earth go from having no living organisms to having living organisms? Abiogenesis is what they call it. The creation of life from lifelessness. And the whole reason we have this problem is that we've drawn an abyss between what is alive and what is not alive. We've said things that are not alive are absolutely not alive and never were and never will be. Whereas things that are alive are absolutely alive. although they'll die, but they're absolutely alive. And that definition involving an infinity in between the two creates a problem that doesn't actually exist in the real world. In the real world, there are many things that occupy the space between the living and the dead. For example, after you die, so you're supposed to be dead, they discovered in the last 20 years that a bunch of genes turn on in your body that have been off for your entire life. And they start the cellular machinery to decompose yourself. Turns out human bodies participate in their own decomposition, not passively as a thing acted upon by other things, the way Newtonian physics leads us to expect the world to work, but as a participant. We are not just dying as something that happened to us, we are dying like something that we're doing. It's amazing. It's there's no woo or new age to it. It's just strict science. But it's strict science that we have a lot of trouble with because we've defined things in such a way that there's not supposed to be things standing athwart the line. You're supposed to either be alive or not be alive. You can't be both at the same time. Everything is tidily separated into two perfect categories. And this is that abstractivism that modernity is infected with. We think our categories are binding upon nature, but nature crosses these lines all the time because they're not real lines. They're our lines that we use to try to help us understand, but then at a certain point, instead of helping us understand, to become obstacles that block us from understanding. So the place where you can see this, I gave two examples, but the place where you can see it most clearly is if you get into biochemistry, which is a really interesting discipline. You look at proteins, look at RNA and DNA and proteins and how they replicate and then what they do inside the cell once they've been replicated. My favorite example is kinesin. Kinesin. It's a protein. You can read the Wikipedia article. I put the name in the chat there. You can read the Wikipedia article on kinesin. It actually has an animation, which is more or less accurate. Kinesin is a motor protein. It's just a protein. There's nothing but carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And yet, it walks and it carries. Kinesin is a protein that latches on to vacuoles that contain something your cell wants to move around. It's like a bubble, a membrane, and inside is the thing your cell wants to move. And once it latches on, its two little molecular feet, which are part of the same protein molecule, begin taking step after step along the internal skeleton inside of the cell. And they pull from one place to another. They move the little bubble of raw materials to where it's supposed to go. And when they arrive at the other end, a chemical marker makes it let go. And so it lets go. And now the bubble has arrived and the kinesin can go do something else. It has not a brain. It doesn't even have a body. It's a single molecule, but it has behavior. I mean, you can literally look at the animation. It's walking, it's carrying. Is it alive or dead? It's not a cell, so it can't be alive, but it's not holding still either. And it's got behavior. So for moderns, this is a huge problem. Things can't have behavior without a will, without a brain. That's how we define things. We think behavior is about us. But all kinds of things in nature, even down to the electron, have behavior. They don't need a brain. They don't need a will. And they don't need any woo. They don't need any ghosts or, spirits. It is the level, the level that we define as not quite alive in science is the level in which character and characteristics blur because there's no actual line between them. And things can engage in behavior without even when you can explain it entirely in terms of their characteristics. The kinesin has physical characteristics that make it carry and walk. It's not magic. It's not mysticism. You could do it with Legos, and yet it's behavior. So this is the thing. The Greeks didn't have the problem we have. They just didn't define these boundaries the way they did. They say, yeah, a rock doesn't have a lot of character. I mean, it's only a very little character in there, but it's more than an electron has. A rock is capable of more behavior than an electron. Electron's pretty much just going to do the thing that it does. It has two or three other things it can do. It can get excited by a photon and jump orbitals and things like that. But generally speaking, there's not much to an electron. Whereas even a simple hunk of granite has an enormous amount of behavior. expands when it gets warm and contracts when it gets cold, and it can melt into lava if it gets hot enough, and it can resist pressure up to a certain amount before it ceases to be a rock. These are the Greeks would say that's its character. Its character consists of its characteristics. But for Homo sapiens, our character is more complicated than that. We don't know how to even describe, let alone measure, all of our characteristics. So we treat the complexity as a rug that we sweep under, and then we call the result character. The Greeks wouldn't make that separation. They'd say it's much simpler if we just acknowledge that some things have a lot of character, some things only have a little. So when you said that the thing about the bankers, when Stephen was talking about what he said, and when you joked, and it was a good joke, that the reason the bankers do that is because they have no character. This is analogous to what the Greeks actually mean. It's why I want to bring this point up, and why I'm not trying to criticize you. I'm trying to weave in what you said to the larger discussion because it's so directly relevant. The Greeks would say everybody's got character, but some characters are more underdeveloped than others. Some characters are more infantile than others, right? I mean, who you were as a baby is much less than who you are now. And not just physically, according to measurable characteristics, but because you've learned so much and you've grown so much. You've absorbed so much. Your character has developed in so many more directions than it possibly could have after a mere 9 months in the womb. So it's possible to have more or less development in your character. And likewise, it's possible for your relationship to your experiences to be either simple quantitative, you just file them away but don't fundamentally change, or qualitative, where you have that aha experience with the bird in the backyard that wasn't supposed to be there, that nobody saw, and now you actually transform. And something becomes meaningful to you in a way that it isn't for anybody else. That kind of qualitative transformation, the person who's undergone the qualitative transformation might not have any greater volume of character than a banker sitting there with his spreadsheets. But the banker has managed to assimilate his character without undergoing any significant metamorphosis of character. Where one spreadsheet was pretty much the same as another. Whereas for you, your character gained a new level of complexity because of its developments. After you saw that bird and reflected on what it meant, that you're the only person in the world who knew that that bird was in your town when it wasn't supposed to be, when nobody thought it could be. Your mind expanded and the bankers didn't. So this is a theme that we're going to see throughout this, is this idea that, a doulos at age 40, a Banausos at age 40, and an Aristos at age 40 all have 40 years of experience. But the Banausos has processed that experience more profoundly than the doulos has. They've had to abstract from and identify patterns and systems of thinking from that experience to a greater degree than the doulos did. And likewise, the Aristos has to develop it even further. And so there's a qualitative difference rather than a quantitative difference. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
The demonstration of character is fate. We have Oedipus, and his disaster is he's too rash. He doesn't spend time checking what's going on carefully enough. He just bypasses stuff. He's even told that his adopted parents aren't his real parents, and he runs away from Corinth thinking he solved the problem, only mitigating the disaster because, well, he didn't really question it. If these aren't my real parents and I run away from Corinth, I might run into my real parents and create the disaster. But that slipped out of his mind. He demonstrates his rashness. He runs into his father, whose chariot has the right of way. Well, he could have just said age before beauty and got off the road, but no. Get out of my way. Bang. And all the Greeks would say, you're the hero, Oedipus. You've just knocked over the other guy. That's what we like to see, us Greeks. And then you've got Hamlet, who's the Nordic, who in this regard is the opposite. He spends too much time thinking about everything, and that mitigates his disaster. Hamlet is a perfectionist. He wants the perfect revenge on his uncle. He not only wants to kill his uncle, he wants his uncle to go to hell. And when his uncle's leaning over praying, he has the perfect opportunity to knock him over the head. But no, this is not perfect enough. I don't want him to go to heaven. If he's praying, he might be forgiven. But this is the thing. It's Hamlet's so inflexible. Suddenly the opportunity presents itself, and it's a question of working out your priorities. Well, the priority is to kill the uncle. God can take care of him after that. But he doesn't do that. It would have been a very short play if he had have knocked his uncle over the head. Would have come out, he would have had the crown, everybody would have bowed, and everybody lives happily ever after. But no, he's so involved in his own immediate circumstances, he doesn't look at the bigger picture. Whereas Oedipus has failed to see his own personal circumstances. In this regard, they're both opposite characters in this regard.
Great example, Stephen. So, you know, it's one of the things that we can talk about. And when Heraclitus says all things flow, he doesn't mean they all flow at the same speed. Some things flow very quickly and others flow very slowly, but they're still flowing. The stone, its flowing has slowed down until the next time it's heated up or crushed. Either one will do. And when it's heated up or crushed, it's going to flow more. It's going to flow at a level that if you'd always only ever known it as a 1-ton block of granite, you would have thought impossible. It sure seemed like it was stable, but the character of the granite contains within it hidden laws of growth and change, and they determine when and under what conditions this thing will change. And it turns out that it does have conditions under which it will change. And if you crush the granite into sand, it sure isn't a granite block anymore. I mean, sand behaves, as anybody who's lived in the Sahara knows, sand behaves very differently than a big block of granite does. They each have a different character. That's then and the character, when it seems so fixed, when the everyday condition or state in which we find it has a state of flow that's so slow, it can look like they're fixed characteristics. But, you know, Vesuvius goes off and the lava runs down over the granite boulder, and next thing you know, it's a liquid. And where was that in the cards? Where was that in our everyday experience? It turns out the granite block had hidden laws of development and change that were not obvious to us. And this is the reason why the Greeks liked this model of character. And it involves the idea that no human being should ever say that something is just what they say it is. Maybe a god who knows everything could be in a position to say that granite boulder is just a granite boulder because I've seen the future and I know lava and being crushed are never in the cards for it. This is all it will ever be. But the rest of us don't know. And when we say it's just the granite boulder that we perceive, we're claiming to be gods. We're claiming to have perfect vision of the future. And we know all the changes that could ever happen. And we're all wrong because, I mean, you know, eventually the sun will turn into a red giant. And when that happens, everything's going to melt, return to ash. So that granite boulder, no matter how stable it seems, it has change coming to it. And that change will not be random change. The way each thing responds when the sun expands will be according to its inner nature. Right? I mean, everything will respond through a different series of transformations to become what the sun is going to make it. And the Greeks just put all that together into the concept of ethos. And it goes to another point that Kenneth makes throughout this paper, and he's actually going to say it in one of these paragraphs. I forget which one. I think it's the next one. He's going to say it's hard to talk about these things in a modern language because our modern language predisposes us to see things in a modern way. Everything is what it is. It's not what it's not. We have this zero-sum concept of the world. Thanks, Angelina. Take care. It's fun talking with you. See you next week, maybe. So, we want everything to fit into the boxes that we've prepared for. We have a big Procrustean bed. Like the villain Procrustes, we want to torture the truth to make it fit the bed of our minds. But nothing really, although it seems to cooperate with us because we have an infinite ability to convince ourselves of our rectitude, it actually doesn't. And thus, when our subjectivity spins out the objective world around us, and we think, now at last that I have all the power, I can make the world the way I want it. Now that I'm strong, I can win. Instead, what we discover is that we're weak and that we lose, and that the cause of our defeat is not anybody else, that we defeated ourselves by acting upon our own desires and ideologies. So this is the thing. The danger of being homo faber when you don't have sophrosyne is that what you spin out of yourself can so often be unhealthy, not healthy. We are adapted for the world that we evolved into. That's why we evolved into it. We emerged in a world full of fruit and game and clean water and clean air and plenty of caves to hide in and animals with skins that we could take off and put on ourselves and plants that have long fibers that can be separated out and woven and turned into cloth. We evolved for a world in which we can thrive. But we can only be guaranteed that we're going to thrive as long as that world doesn't change too much. And when we act as homo faber, we act to change the world into something else that we didn't make. I mean, that we didn't evolve to handle. All right, so his next sentence. Let's do his next sentence. Culture, this is the third sentence of paragraph 14. Culture is the domain of artifice. Man originates and grows out of his own human impulses. The realm of fabricated, spun nature over which he plays God. As little as he comprehends and controls his own obscure self, his ethos, his character, that much more will he be tyrannized by totalitarian and excoriating forms of culture. Oh boy, that is such a Kenneth sentence. I'm just going to paste it. I know I pasted it before as part of a paragraph, but there it is. This is such a Kenneth sentence, and it's full of chewy goodness that we need to work over. So first of all, totalitarianism. This is an example of spinning out an unhealthy inner nature so that an unhealthy subjectivity that never seemed to bother us becomes an objective, thing, is totalitarianism. Under Hannah Arendt's definition of totalitarianism, she says, we throw that word around like crazy. Anybody we don't like, we call totalitarian. I can't remember who it was who was saying, our will to make words obey us has really stripped the meaning out of so many words that there are people who will even say dogs are fascist. Just so they just are. They're just fascist. And they mean it. Except who the hell can tell what they mean? Because by the time you've done that to the word fascist, what the hell are you even talking about anymore? And we do that with the word totalitarianism. So I take Hannah Arendt for her definition of totalitarianism, which can't be easily summarized. But the core of it is the idea that in a totalitarian movement, all the normal sources of authority within a society are dissolved. They're attacked and broken down, all of them. Ethics, religion, law, the economy, everything. It's all stripped down. She says classes are converted into masses. And the difference, even though we use the word mass movement and mass this and mass the other thing, and she says the difference is all the difference in the world. Because classes have interests and they'll fight for those interests. They may not know what their interests are, but they can sometimes understand their own interests and fight for them. Masses, by definition, do not have interests. If they had interests, that would interfere with the dear leader's control over the mass. So the dear leader works on the mass over and over, molding it into clay to make it malleable to his own will. And he makes it malleable to his own will because he's under the impression, which so many moderns are, that the world would be a better place if only he could make everything the way he wants it. I know what's best for people. If only I could impose my will on a large scale, I could solve all the world's problems. I know how they need to be solved. I know what history means. I have decided, and I can compel the world to obey. But to do that, I need more strength than I have. I need millions of arms, not just these two arms. But the problem is those millions of arms, they all have their own interests, and they'll resist me. This guy will say Jesus wouldn't like it. That guy will say it's against the Constitution. That guy will say my workers union, disapproves of what you're trying to do. And the dear leader can't have any of that. So he organizes and reorganizes and reorganizes society to produce, as Stephen says in the comments, a triumph of the will, his will, by eliminating everybody else's will, by breaking their wills. In the way that you break a horse in the old days to make it obey you, the leader breaks the wills of everybody in the society, which rips apart all of the traditional forms of authority. Anything that could resist him is smashed. Either people go along with it, or they're jailed, or they're murdered. So it's a process of purification. And as Hannah says, the result is that where you used to have different kinds of competing interests organized into tensions with one another, the result afterwards is the mass is a homogeneous substance that learns to transmit the message of the day from the dear leader as faithfully as they can, and to act on the message of the day from the dear leader as faithfully as they can. Even when what the dear leader says today is 100% contradiction of what the dear leader said yesterday, you have learned not to resist. You have learned not to say, but yesterday you said this. You've learned not to try to make sense of it. You've learned not to believe in anything. She says, if people are still believing in things, it's not totalitarianism. It is learning to break the spine of your own character to the point that you can't stand for anything that makes you compatible with the totalitarian movement. And the result of that is that the dear leader is now able to impose his will upon the world. His will has triumphed. But the consequence is that the totalitarian movement self-destructs every time, without fail. Because now that the dear leader, using Kenneth's terminology, can spin out his own subjectivity on a scale no human being has ever dreamed of before, with no resistance, and create exactly what he wants or believes or thinks should be the case, he is now thwarted by all the contradictions and errors and insanity of his own subjective life that have now been created in front of him and all around him. And now, in the past, he could just sweep away any contradictions in his ideas or feelings and pretend that they didn't happen. But now that he took it out of his mind and put it into the world, it's not obedient to the laws of his dreaming self. It's obedient to the laws of actual things that actually exist on Earth. And therefore, when they're stupid ideas and he makes them manifest objectively, he can't wave them away. They're now in his way, and they're in everybody's way. They've become the big problem that everybody has to face. And they become his big problem. And ultimately, it topples his society. What used to take centuries or thousands of years for a society to self-destruct from the foolishness of the subjectivity of its leaders being manifest objectively and getting in everybody's way, he can make happen in a single generation. In just a few, was it 15 years? The Third Reich only lasted 15 years. The 1,000-year Reich only lasted 15 years. And it's strictly because
12 years.
12 years. Thank you, Stephen. 12 years. Because as Heraclitus said 2,500 years ago, it would not be better for men if they could get exactly what they want. He got exactly what he wanted, and it turned out to thwart him at every turn. Same with Stalin. This is the issue that Kenneth is alluding. I mean, Kenneth has read all of Arendt's stuff. When he's talking about the subjective life that we spin out of ourselves, he's including all this stuff about totalitarianism. Totalitarianism, I'll call on Joe in just a second. Totalitarian movements submit to their dear leaders because their followers' inner nature, their ethos, has been weakened and shattered. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do it. And the irony is that they think that they're being strong by attaching themselves to a strong leader. But what they're actually doing, they have a terror of weakness. They have a terror of being out competed. And so that's why they want to be part of a strong thing. But in order to be part of that strong thing, they've hollowed themselves out. This is what C.S. Lewis calls men with hollow chests. They don't stand for anything themselves personally now, right? Because if they stood for something, they'd end up in conflict with the dear leader, and the dear leader would crush them. The only people left in the movement are the ones who've broken that part of themselves. They can't stand up for anything or to anything. And the consequence is that when the dear leader dies, which he does, usually as a consequence of his own actions, everything that they have attached themselves to is gone. And they collapse into a big bag of character fragments. Where there once was a character, there's now just a bunch of rearrangeable pieces designed to be reconfigurable every day, depending on what the message of the day is from the dear leader. And now there will never be another message of the day from the dear leader. He's dead. And he could put them together, but they can't put themselves together. That part of themselves had to go, or they would have been purged. So, the irony is that this search for strength leads to the ultimate weakness. Without character, you got nothing. Plato talks about this, Socrates talks about this, Aristotle talks about this. It's your character that makes you strong, because it's the thing that drives you, hopefully in a healthy direction, a direction that increases your strength over time, because it increases your health over time. It increases your healthy relationships to the world over time, so that you have the whole world on your side. And so that everybody around you gets stronger, as well as you, so that when you're weakened, they can pick up the slack, which is the opposite of what the dear leader does, which is to hollow out all his followers, so that when he's not able to lead, neither are they. It maximizes the disaster when he himself passes. And he's confused that for a state of strength. He thinks strength is everybody needs me. I'm the voice of everything. He doesn't realize that's a condition of weakness, the ultimate condition of weakness. So, where I'm going to stop here for the moment before calling on Q&A is this idea. Aristotle says most problems humans face are created by those humans themselves and or other humans. Our species is at a stage of development where we're not usually the prey of leopards or volcanoes. Usually we're hoist on our own petard. The Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote shows are all about the human condition. If the Wile E. Coyote could just find it in his character to leave the Roadrunner alone, he could have a happy life. But he just can't do it. He can't. He has to mess with the Roadrunner, and it never ends the way he thinks it will. But he always thinks it will. He can't stop doing it. So who's strong? He's a genius who can come up with all these incredible plans involving all this machinery and all these laws of physics, and it works against him. The Roadrunner doesn't have a brain in his head, but he always wins because the laws of nature. He's on the side of the laws of nature, and the Wile E. Coyote is not, which puts the Wile E. Coyote in an existentially untenable position, much like Hitler and Stalin. Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
That's a really interesting point that you just made about this idea of classes and masses. I mean, it's something that Seneca writes about is this idea of crowds, and how crowds essentially are giving away your ability to reason, to even differ at all. I mean, so that you're in a state of frenzy, if you will. But imagine living in that state. I mean, essentially, that's one of the things is that it's interesting because you almost have to remove people's ability to reason, which is something that's seen as a modern triumph. That we can reason, but you have to remove it in order for somebody to be able to be part of the mass. Because if you're to question it, obviously, then that would be problematic. So there's like an inherent contradiction there. It's like there can be no reason other than mine, and it turns in on itself. And this is very much like any system that is functioning. The rules that we're meant to protect it will eventually kill it. You know, because what happens is you create these rules that absolutely cannot be broken. And all of a sudden, then, as you said a little bit earlier, is that, you know, the system fails to adapt. Whereas classes actually do have interests, and they have a voice. And so, yeah, uh, I don't, I mean, the thing that's pretty scary to me is the, um, the, I don't know, the uniformity of just how, I mean, you can kind of see, and I don't like to go here and say this, but where you start to end up where everybody has to look like this. You know, I mean, this is the way everybody has to be, right? They have to be blonde hair, blue eyes. I mean, because this is what fits my worldview, and that's what the dictator thinks. Like they think, oh, well, wait a minute, you know, I'm absolutely right. I'm doing what's reasonable. You know, but what happens is he's not listening to anybody else, and that inability to take that feedback. Well, then all of a sudden he has, you know, the idea of what exactly the way things need to work. Um, anyway, I think that this is probably one of the more interesting sentences that I've been coming across in Kenneth's work, because it's terrifying, and it's terrifying because you know, it should give everybody, I don't know, a warning as to why you should feel really uncertain about your opinions.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it is such an important medicine for human beings to take life with a lot of humility and recognize that we're not gods and we don't get to dictate terms. We don't get to say how things are. We can study how they are and approximate how they are, but we never get to dictate how things are because there's always a bonus of additional things that we have either misunderstood or entirely failed to notice. And we always want those things to be the ceteris paribus part, the part, all things being equal, the part that doesn't matter. And yet, inevitably, when, you know, as Donald will note, when you work on programming projects, sometimes things go according to plan and schedule, but sometimes there are complexity bombs that just explode in the middle of a project. You thought step 4 was going to be a small step, but instead it was an old piece of code nobody understood, and it turned out it's being called 17 ways from Sunday. And when you try to make some simple little change, you broke components all over the system that you thought were unrelated. And you can't figure out how the hell can we move forward from here? And that one step may take more time than all the rest of the schedule put together. And the fact that there can be such massive explosions in the bonus of the parts that we don't understand, it should discipline us to understand that we are not in charge, right? We all of life is a process of discovery. And there's some parts of it we think we have a handle on and we might or might not. And there's other parts that we don't think we have a handle on, and some of those might turn out to be the most important parts. We would, our economy and politics would have to be radically different to take all this into account. And it shows you the level of abstraction and irreality that is the foundation of the modern world, that you wouldn't be allowed to transform the US Constitution or legal system or economy to just acknowledge the truth that we are flawed and imperfect and don't understand a lot of things we think we do. It would take a revolution. I mean, nobody would let you mess with the things you'd have to mess with to get it in line with our actual human condition.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things I'd just say, you know, in general, I was, you know, having a conversation about this recently with somebody like Cincinnatus, you know, who gave up, you know, having power, and you know that's the opposite of a, you know, I'm not saying it's not flawed, but that you know that's the opposite of what a totalitarian would do, because you know, he recognizes whatever role he played and left, and that things need to change. So as opposed to, wait a minute, this is not working out like I thought. I need to make sure everybody and double down on whatever I thought to be true. It's yeah, I mean it's just it's the abdication of power, not the actual concentration of it. That's my main point.
Yes. Yes. It's an important point. Thank you, Joe. Hey, John, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Hey, Rick. Um, so I was just thinking about what you were saying about the totalitarian leaders creating hollowed individuals, who are become the masses. Um, and and that reminded me of like this book written by this guy named Ken Collins, where he talks about like what great leaders are, or like, great companies, and usually like they have like a great leader. And he calls them like a 5X leader or something like that. But these are individuals who who train those below them to be great, so that when they so when they're so so that when they're done, I'm sorry. Okay, so that when they're done, so that when they're ready to step down from the CEO role, the company does even better than when they were in it. And it's not like, oh, I'm gone now. Look at how bad the company's burning. It's the opposite.
Yes. Yes. That's a critically important point, right? It's one of the of what I'm coming to understand are the many actual failures of Alexander the Great's leadership. One of the ones that is sort of fairly widely acknowledged is that he failed to train up successors who are able to continue and develop what he started. That everything fell to pieces the moment he died really summarizes the difference between someone who makes a cult of personality around himself, whether he's mediocre like Hitler or fantastic like Alexander the Great. It doesn't seem to make a difference in the scale of the catastrophe that's caused afterwards when you've made a whole bunch of people who are dependent on you and then you pass. Good leadership depends upon acknowledging that, I'm mortal and I'm going to die. And then what? And it can't be like, I can't remember, was it Louis the Sun King who famously said, Après moi le déluge? After I die, it can all fail because I'm just that important, and that's good. That's the self-centered egotistical thing that you're alluding to, and it's a massive problem, and it's core to what totalitarianism is, according to Arendt. Things that don't have that feature, we shouldn't call them totalitarian. Totalitarianism is a new kind of thing, and it's a specific kind of thing. And the reason it had to be named is because there's nothing else like that. I mean, tyranny doesn't work like that. Authoritarianism doesn't work like that. Fascism definitely doesn't work like that. It's why Mussolini and Hitler ended up fighting. They're, incompatible systems. Mussolini, for all of his terrible qualities, and there were plenty, he stood for something, and Hitler couldn't have that. So anybody who stands for something is an obstacle. That's the core of the totalitarian movement. There must be no obstacles. Everyone must fall in line. And to make sure that they fall in line, you test them by changing what you tell them to do over and over and over. And you watch them for the faintest hint of resistance. And if they are, you demote them, you push them out, or you kill them, like Stalin did. Either way, they have to go. No one must resist. It creates an atmosphere of terror and conformity. Um, there's an interesting thing that she went through three different generations of her theory of totalitarianism while she was writing the book. Its structure partially reflects the fact that she changed her mind a couple times, and there was a stage where she thought that the important thing is that you've got three kinds of people. You've got the leader, the followers, and the victims. But by her final stage, she came to understand that the difference between the followers and the victims was a fake distinction. Says, especially when you study Stalin, you see that many of his followers became the victims. And Hitler did something similar, although not as drastic. That the exact same brainwashing that prepares you to be a victim prepares you to be a follower, and vice versa. It's you must not resist the will. The difference between being a follower or a victim is whatever that will decides to do with you. You're the same kind of person, ultimately. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody who Hitler killed, had been totalitarianized. It meant he wanted them to be. Which is why these concentration until late in the war, these concentration camps to try to torture people into demonstrating his theories of race and character. He wanted to prove that you could make people into that. It was important to him. He spent enormous a number of resources that he actually needed to fight the Eastern Front. He spent on trying to manufacture these laboratory conditions to prove his theories of human character, which were ultimately proven, I don't know what, true, false, weird, evil. Donald, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I think we're close here. I'm to showing just how related some radically different results are. And I want to say here to start with autarky, that self-sufficiency. A few months ago, we talked about autarky as sort of a prerequisite for sophrosune. You need those psychic resources, if nothing else, to make your will independent, to exercise it properly in terms of sophrosune. And yet, as we're reminded in recent history, totalitarians are fascinated by autarky, self-sufficiency, in order not to allow them to will in accordance with sophrosune, but to will vicariously, however they want. They want freedom of action, freedom of willing, and they need autarky to do that, self-sufficiency of their state, so it can't be pressured or restricted by other states or other groups. And it's just strange that autarky is with the K version. Yeah. Yeah. So I just, yeah, I just find that autarky is a very fundamental concept that in the branches of its tree are found the Aristoi and the totalitarians, both desiring it. I don't know if that's. I think that's enough. I was going to say something else, but now old age is catching up.
Listening to me talk is aging you so prematurely. You're losing the capacity for speech as you listen.
Here, 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 here. Yay for the old age.
Yay, sure beats the alternative.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, it's there's a lot. What you said illustrates so many things, and I'm not going to try to spin them all out because we're out of time. But it's the capacity of the human mind to reinterpret the same event 12 different ways with 12 different people, at least 12 different ways with 12 different people, is something moderns don't really want to talk about. But the ancients were obsessed with, and it's why they developed these theories of character. What is it in us that makes us see the same event, even when we're all right there looking at it, so radically differently? What is that power within us? A liability, sure, but it's way too active to just call it an absence or a weakness or a deficit. It's clearly a function in us. It's something our brain does. It's part of, and this is where Kenneth really builds on Kierkegaard and then hits the accelerator and drives 100 miles further. This idea from Hegel and Kierkegaard that the things we hate about human minds seeming to go wrong are almost inevitably, when we dig deeply enough, they turn out to be the exact same faculty that's responsible for so many of the strengths we admire. That the capacity to abstract is both a blessing and a curse at the same time. It's not two different functions. The good one, which I have, and the bad one, which you have, and that's why I'm right and you're wrong, which is how moderns like to think of things. This existentialist tradition says it's the same faculty at work in both of us. And just like it makes you conclude some things that I can see are wrong, right? It also makes me conclude some things that you can see are wrong, but I can't see that they're wrong because my faculty is a thumb on the scales of justice that prevents me from objectively assessing, who's got the truth and how much of the truth do they have. This is part of what I think is the most extraordinary about this existentialist line of philosophy is that and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, with Angelina, is this idea that moderns have these tidy categories that allow us to justify why we should win and everybody else should lose. And these are just atheistic revisions of the genocidal categories of the Middle Ages. But they get in the way of us understanding ourselves and what we're actually doing and what's actually happening. And they cause us to try to purify ourselves into only the good parts and to demonize whoever we don't like into all the bad parts. And as long as we do that, we're never going to understand them or us. Because the truth is, it's the same human faculties of gnosis and noesis at work in each of us in just different combinations and different levels of emphasis. And all of this is what he's getting at in this paper. And that so much of this is in the Greeks that, Donald could pull out with preparation, he could pull out a Plato dialogue and show Socrates walking somebody through one of these lessons. And yet to moderns, it's just like right over our heads. It's like weird stuff nobody's ever said before. We can't imagine that it was once common knowledge, that the human mind works this way, because to us, it doesn't seem obvious at all. Joe, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
I just have to say that that is such a good point that you just made because it relates right back to the masses, that the idea that we all look at something and have a different interpretation of it, as opposed to something that emerges that is much better than it would be if we just looked at it from our own little perspective, then you need to stomp that out. And that is the idea of thinking in terms of masses. I mean, so I really think that is probably such a good example because you have to ask yourself, what is it that gets lost in this process? And, could you imagine? I mean, this is like, one religion, that's the absolute one. And it really is, I think, probably the best example of what is lost.
Yes.
In that process is that somebody else's internal experience is completely gone.
Yes.
It's being eradicated.
They're reduced to an object that we can kick around.
Exactly.
Throw that object under the bus.
Exactly. And it's because, I know and you don't.
Exactly.
And you reduce it to the binary.
Yes.
That's the thing. Yeah.
When you see how relentlessly we play the zero-sum game of trying to reduce everything to two little points, my point, which has all the virtues and is right about everything, and your point, which has all the vices and is wrong about everything, and you see how even people who have degrees, even people who seem intelligent, you get them on the right subject, and that same neurosis comes out again, and they're trying to strip the world down to two little points, the right point and the wrong point. And you think, how can they be doing this every day of their lives and never once notice how stupid it is that they're trying to pretend the world is made up of two zero-dimensional points? They're so smart elsewhere in their life. Where did that IQ go when they turn to this subject and all of a sudden, whoop, there's right and there's wrong, and I'm right and you're wrong? And the answer is we are so good at these mental gymnastics that we do them without being conscious. I mean, when somebody starts reciting the zero-sum propositions that their ideology has taught them, their conscious brain has gone to sleep. They think they're thinking when they're actually behaving like a human tape recorder, just reciting the catechism that they've learned and feeling satisfied because it's so familiar. This is my familiar catechism. Here we go. All black people are bad. All white people are good. It will always be so. The end. And then the next minute, they're back to talking about really important things in theoretical physics. And you're like, you're the same guy who just said that stupid thing about race. And now you're doing theoretical physics. What happened to your brain in between? How did you not see it? And the answer is in the modern world, we're taught not to understand our own character. We don't notice these shifts of thinking that we engage in. And, I'm not just talking about right wing, crazy thinking. Left wingers do it too. Centrists do it too. Everybody in the modern world does this stuff where they're modulating between grown up thinking and I can't even call it childish because no child is so stupid as to try to reduce everything to two zero-dimensional points. I mean, that requires an enormous amount of education and catechism to get you to the point where you think that's a reasonable thing to do. Everybody does it. And nobody sees, they see when other people do it. Oh, this is why you're wrong. And then they don't see when the very next breath they do it on a different subject in a different way. And this is the thing partially that Ken is trying to get us to see in this paper. What is the role of character in our lives? What is the role of our unconscious reflexes? How often do we shift in and out of being conscious? When are we actually noticing what's happening around us? And when are we just sleepwalking? I mean, that's classic Heraclitus, right? He says, even though the logos, the laws of nature, the principles are right in front of us all the time, literally, we can't see anything without seeing the logos in action. It's like pressed up against our face. And yet people behave as though they'd never experienced it once in their life when you try to tell them about it. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. This doesn't make any sense. How could any of that be true? He says that's the extent to which we're, and he doesn't say my political party is awake and your political party sleepwalking. He says this is a fundamentally human problem and it goes back thousands of years before these parties ever existed. This is a human thing that we do. And the way out of the trap is to notice it and take responsibility for it. And so I will give the final comment, as is our tradition on these seminars, to Stephen, who always saves up some juicy thing to say. Right.
Just going to disagree with Donald that autarky is not a special category of totalitarianism. It's a category of mercantilism. And I'll ask Donald if he agrees with the position which the West has allowed itself to get into, which to me is insanity, is where they allowed the Chinese to dominate the rare earths market. Because China operates on the principle that they will make their own population suffer to export stuff at the lowest possible price to capture markets. You wonder why the Chinese are always undercutting you, because it's on purpose. They're a dictatorship. They don't fight fair. Not for a second. But you Westerners just lap it up. Oh, yeah, just give us cheap stuff. Watch out for the merchants. Beware of the merchant. There's a game going on here. And well, if you want to survive as the West, to some degree, you're going to have to control production and resources, because if you're in a war, don't think about borrowing bullets from the Chinese. They won't give you any. What do you say to that, Donald? I'll let you have the last word.
Oh, it's not something I want, Stephen. But I was trying to show that not autarky as a economic system, but autarky as a principle is desired by Aristoi and totalitarians and other, in order to allow their will to work as they desire it to. Now, I think if it can't be the principle that every country desires autarky, but as an economic device, I think, large groups of countries could hope to achieve this in some way. as one general said, you know, the only thing worse than going to war with allies is going to war without them, you know, or conversely, you know, it's yes, I think there is a real problem with the Chinese, but I think between relatively free countries in South America, in the Pacific, in Western Europe, they can achieve enough freedom of action to have some sort of non-coerced will in most of their actions, you know. I
Are
mean,
you sure they're not looking for freedom from freedom?
no, I'm not. I don't. I'm not. I'm not seeing a lot of rulers or lead. I mean, obviously, you're somehow thinking also of Trump, tariffs, autarky. That's where his tariff. You know, he would like us, and I suspect not so he can rule with sophrosyne, but so he can reinforce, he can reduce the pressure on him from allies.
Oh, well, it's actually a question of the $1 trillion gap between exports and imports in America.
Yeah, but
You do know the figures.
I know it's a huge number, and I'm not one. I'm not an economist, so I don't fully understand all
America
of that.
buys $4 trillion worth of stuff from the rest of the world, but only exports $3 trillion worth of stuff, and this is the gap.
Yes.
Well,
It's our
you know,
appetite
if this is between us and the French and the British and the Germans and the Spanish and the Australians and the New Zealanders and whatever, and the Canadians, you
not
know,
including the Martians.
we can, yeah, well, we can work it out, and no country's sovereignty is threatened by these trade imbalances. But they may well be threatened by having huge trade imbalances with countries hostile to them.
They
and I
all
think that's
want to
what
be top dog, Donald.
they all
They're
do.
all
Yeah.
out for power.
So I'm going to jump in.
Please shut us off.
Stephen
Shut us
knew I
off.
was going to do this. That's why he plays these gambit cards at the end. This is a great subject, and I'm going to lead with it next time.
But I'm not sure if either of them understand it, though. Sorry.
Well, see, that's the point is we're going to talk next time about the difference between the Banausic idea of autarkia and the Aristic idea of autarkia, because they're two different things with the same name. And it goes to the character question that this paper is about. So
I think that's an astute observation, Rick. Thank you for making it.
standing on the, shoulders of giants. Thank you both for bringing it up. Anyway, I had a great time.
Okay. See you next week.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. David.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.